My watch is showing almost 7 o'clock.
You have a quorum, sir?
Well, we will take roll and see how we do, unless somebody wants to wait and go be late. But that would not be our way. Okay, it is 7 p.m., and we will call this meeting to order. Are we standing for the pledge? Is that what we do here customarily?
Just going to proceed with roll call, if you're ready.
Roll call, fine.
Director Bruins? Director Harpootlian?
Here.
Director Craig?
Here.
Alternate Director Yulo?
Here.
Director McAllister?
Here.
Chair Sinks?
Here.
Vice Chair Rennie?
Here.
Director Miller?
Here.
Director Gibbons?
Here.
Director Harney?
Here.
And Director Simidian and Director Griffith are absent.
Post-election blues.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. We will now go to oral communication. Public comment on matters that are not on the agenda is up for, if I see anybody in the audience, is there anybody who wants to speak on matters not on the agenda this evening? Seeing none, we will move on. And I have one consent item, that's approval of the minutes of our May meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? That item passes. On the regular calendar, first of all, our CEO report, item 2. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start my first meeting and my first report by thanking those who have paved the way for the last couple of years to make this agency a reality. They're all sitting around me. And I definitely want to have special thanks to Melody, who's been working on this almost nonstop for quite some time and still is, actually. You'd asked me to talk about or consider whether the authority and the board should create a few committees that would help out. And I do believe that having a few working groups certainly can help us along the way. The first one is going to be a communication group, and I've asked Misty to speak of that in a couple of minutes. I want to go through other groups that I would like, at one point, perhaps not immediately, but at one point, suggest or encourage the board to consider forming a technical group, financial group, community outreach, and legislative committee group. Those are going to come along the way, and when I feel that we are at a point where we need to have some support from the membership, then I will definitely come to you and suggest that we do so. There's a need to move a little fast on bringing staff to this authority. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. We are stretching the staff of the city of Sunnyvale as well as the city of Cupertino quite a bit in order to get work done, and I do need to have additional help from staff that will be hired for this agency specifically. And that probably will be the first issue that we will discuss with the executive committee, provided that tonight you folks form one. The last thing that I have on my report is we're going to be putting together a letter and send it to the supervisors over at the county, asking them to, and we're going to ask the chair to sign it, asking them to appoint an alternate to the commissioner. We don't have one yet, and I think we need to have somebody to back Mr. Simidian. That is all I had, and actually one last thing. This is my first report. It's verbal. The ones to come in the future will be in writing. So I beg your pardon, it's been only 2 weeks that I'm on board, and it's been a little bit hectic. So with that, I'm going to ask Misty if she can step up and talk to us about the communication group that we would like to talk to you about. One more time.
Thank you. There we go. Staff is proposing that we create the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Communications Working Group to establish an open two-way communication channel between the authority staff and the member jurisdiction staff, so the cities, the counties, and Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We want to be able to coordinate our best practices. Staff among all the cities, they know their communities best. They know what channels of communication are best. They know which messages resonate with their residents and businesses. And so we want to be able to coordinate all of our messaging and communications efforts with them. We see this as improving our public outreach and our communications overall. As Tom mentioned, I'm with the city of Cupertino, and I don't necessarily know what resonates in South County or other areas. So I think this will be really beneficial for me as well as the rest of the cities. What we're talking about here is just regular meetings with city-level staff, probably once a month, to be determined the time frame and the date and time. Could be rotating in person, could just be phone calls, probably about an hour. Keeping notes about those meetings and sending it out to the group so that everyone can stay informed as things are moving along. We did speak with city managers and the county managers and told them about this group, told them they recommended some of their staff that are mostly communications staff, PIOs, communications level managers, or some sustainability staff if they have them. So it probably will be a mix of that. And obviously representation, we do want all cities to be represented on this working group, but we also know that some cities have a limited staff availability. So we will definitely work with some of the smaller cities that can't provide somebody to attend a meeting every month and make sure that they're included in the communications. And that ends my report on that.
Any question on the report that we just gave you, Mr. Chairman? I'd be glad to.
Yes. John?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So when you were asking for getting an action to get staff going a lot faster then, so as a question for the board, where does that come along in our action items?
This was just in my report. It's not in the action items. Next month will be. So this was in my verbal report. It's not in the action items.
Well, that's what I mean, not tonight, but when do you expect to come back and say, this is how many people we need to hire and we need to have this kind of funding?
We anticipate that we're going to be coming, hopefully talking to the executive committee in July, and by August, we'll bring you an organization chart and a list of people that we want to hire and over 18 months or 24 months, as well as personnel rules and regs, job classifications, job description. We anticipate that we'll be able to bring the whole package to the board in August or at the latest September.
And for the communication committee, do you need to hire folks sooner than later?
For the communications working group, this isn't hiring people, but I think overall for effective communications, Tom will be hiring communications staff at some point. That will take
Will that become to us before August? Do we have to allocate any funds, or do you have discretionary funds that you can use beforehand?
We have budgeted, I believe, for the city of Cupertino, somewhere around $125,000 plus the contracts that we have with the contractors and vendors. So we have money in there to cover all the communication work.
Okay, thank you.
More questions?
Yes, what,
Daniel?
yes, thank you. In terms of the communication working group, what steps are you prepared to take to reach out to these folks? Are you expecting the board to come to you with the staff?
We've already reached out to city managers and county managers that were at a meeting earlier today, the county and city managers meeting. I passed out a list of possible staff to that meeting, or their possible communication staff, to ask them if those were the right people to reach out to. So we'll be working with the city managers on that.
Okay, thank you.
Ron?
John, go ahead.
You may have already asked this, but I'm wondering what procedurally, we approved funding for the CEO at this point. What does he really need to come back to us for? Does he, for the individual hires, does he need to come back, or does he not need to come back?
I believe the funding was for a contract with the CEO. There is no fund. There is funding for support that will come from Cupertino and Sunnyvale. What I'm suggesting tonight is the agency need to staff up, has its own staff, and use them to do the work that needs to be done over the next 12 months. Right now, we're just using the help from Sunnyvale with Sunnyvale staff and help from Cupertino with Cupertino staff, but they also are busy doing their own work, and sometimes they're not available when you need them. When you get your own staff, they will always be available to do the business of this agency.
So you'll come back for funding and for establishing a position?
Yes, in August.
Both, yeah, okay.
And you expect that at the August meeting, to be clear, a staffing plan?
It is certainly my hope that it would be, that everything will be said and done. In July, we will, to the extent that there is an executive committee formed tonight, we will be calling on the executive committee to come and work with us, and we will bring in all the information that we need to bring to them and get their input. Then hopefully we can go to the full board in August or at the latest September.
Thank you. More questions? If not, we'll move on to item 3, which is to approve key policies to guide SVCE implementation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've having watched the first meeting of the board as well as being there for the second meeting, I felt the need that to come to you tonight with a number of policy questions that we can use your guidance for, and from there we can go on and start doing all the work that needs to be done over the next 6 months. There are 5 areas of concern that I want to talk about tonight. More specifically, how we're going to roll the program out, and you heard some of that in the last meeting. Then what kind of rates we want to charge the customers on day one. Third would be what type of initial working capital do we need in order to keep us afloat for the first couple of years. And fourth, how much money we need to set aside in order to take care of the debt that we have to some of the cities, actually all of you, and to also have a capital working program that is not borrowed, and also to have some money for rate stabilization fund. Finally, we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about the power resource mix, which you heard from our consultant during the last meeting about. I'm going to take them one at a time, and I'm going to beg your indulgence to let me finish the entire presentation. I know you may have a question as I go along. If you could hold it back, because it's fairly possible that that question will be answered in the second part or the third part of the presentation. The first is phasing out, how to phase the customers into the program. And I am recommending to you the third option that the consultant shared with you last time, which is the fast option, which to start in April 1st, and 3 months later to bring in a second phase, and 3 months later to bring in a third phase. We think this is an appropriate way to go because it would allow us to wait until PG&E publish the rates January 1st before we start noticing the customers. And by doing it all in 6 months, then our message will always be the same because the rates are steady for the entire year and not changing. We also think that if we take our time, that may be a little risky because right now market prices, especially for renewable resources, are down. So we want to take advantage of it by being able to lock in perhaps several years in the future of some of these resources. If we wait, the longer we wait, the more likely other CCAs will come in and pretty much take all the resources that are available in the market, and we're going to be left with the more expensive resources. So the phase out for phase number 1, we are looking at all small and medium commercial customers, as well as 20% of the residential customers. Phase 2, which takes place 3 months later, will bring in 35% of the residential customers and all large commercial and industrial customers. And finally, in phase 3, we'll bring in the remaining 45% of residential customers or agricultural customers, street lighting, and others. Just worthy of noting that our intent is to go to each and every one of your service areas and tap into that on phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3. So we're not going to leave anybody out, unless, of course, one of you specifically says, leave me out of phase 1 and ask the board to vote on that. Then, to the extent that the board votes on it, then we'll be glad to do what you want. But that is how we want to phase it in. In terms of rates, we think offering a rate that gives a symbolic 1% lower than PG&E will be a good thing. We also want to keep those rates steady all throughout 2017 and 2018, which in a sense, if PG&E's rates go up by 3% in 2018, as our consultant predicted, then in a sense we are giving the customers 4% reduction in 2018. We think the customer probably will appreciate more the steadiness of the rates, more so than the discount. Quite frankly, a 1% discount on the electric generation amounts to probably less than half of 1%, maybe 1/3 of 1% on the overall electric and natural gas bill that the customer gets from PG&E. So even if you try to do more than 1%, if you go, let's say, 3%, in effect, you're really giving them a 1% discount on the electric and gas bill, and if that bill is about $150 for residential customers, then you're giving them about $1.50 a month. But again, we wanted to have that 1% just to provide the symbolic gesture to the customer that we can do better than PG&E can. There are obviously other ways to do it. You can offer a larger discount. Just keep in mind, for every 1% of discount that you give of PG&E's electric generation rates, in a sense, you have to forego an additional 5% of renewable resources that you can buy. That's how the math works. For every 1% of renewable resources, we have to pay a premium of $500,000. A 1% discount on rates is about $2.5 million. So 1% discount on rates equivalent to 5% less clean resources that we can buy. We can, if we want to, just match PG&E's rates exactly, but that doesn't give us a whole lot of wiggle room if PG&E happen during the year, as they do lower the rates. Sometimes they do lower them, sometimes they push them up. So we thought maybe a 1% will give us just a little bit of a cushion, just in case a couple of months down the road after we start, PG&E decides that they've been charging too much and they're going to lower the rates a little bit. So that's what we are recommending on the rates. Good. Next one. Working capital. You've heard different numbers based on different phase out in the last presentation. I'm going to share with you what I've learned over the years as the conventional method of what utilities usually do when they set their working capital. They generally set it at about 6 weeks of annual revenue. 6 weeks is the time that it takes from the time you need to pay your bill to the time you collect the money from the customer. That's generally the difference in timing. We think we can probably bring that down to about 4 weeks if we negotiate some smart contracts with the sellers. We can do better, but the seller will always put a premium on the fact that they're not getting their money early enough, because most of them generally in the market will want the money 20 days past delivery. So if we can push that to 30 days or 30-some days, I think we'll be okay. 4 weeks of cost of operation is about $20 million. We expected our annual expected revenue is $250 million, and 4 weeks of that comes to about $20 million. So we are recommending to you to set the working capital at $20 million. And furthermore, we want to seek voluntary funding of that $20 million from the member cities, to the extent that we can find a mutual, agreeable, beneficial arrangement between the authority and the cities that will volunteer to step up. We have been talking to your finance directors and to the city managers, and we are in the process of moving forward on getting indicative prices from the banks. Then we're going to come back and discuss it with your cities to see if there's an appetite for you to step up and fund some of that money. Of course, as an alternative, we can go to the banks and get that money. In that case, we're going to need some guarantees, and the guarantee is going to come from you. And again, talking to the city managers, they seem to be okay with providing those guarantees if that is the route that we're going to go. And nobody seems to really to have found the $20 million to be disturbing. There are other options, and probably we don't want to go there tonight, but there are other options that I'm hearing from some of the suppliers that they could do in order to kind of wrap up their supply along with their banking arrangement all in one. I don't know how exactly that's going to work, so I'm not going to go in details about it, but there are some other options too. But again, our best option is to come to you and see if you are willing to fund the $20 million, and that we pay back over 5 years with interest, of course. Okay, so how is it that we're going to pay that back? And while we still owe you $2.7 million, by the way, that we need to pay back in 4 years in accordance to the JPA. We are asking to hold back 5% of our annual revenue to, one, pay back the $2.7 million that you have already spent, or some of you spend more than others, and also to pay back the working capital funding that you, if you choose to do so, will be given us. And finally, to whatever that's left, we'll put in rate stabilization fund to help us keep our rates steady. And we think we can do that. Actually, we can do more if we want to, but I'm being a bit conservative and not trying to take too much money and set it aside. The last thing that we have on our list is the supply portfolio mix. Now, because in a way we are fixing the way we are charging rates, we are fixing the way we are setting money aside to deal with the debts that we have, trying to set a minimum for renewable resources and greenhouse gas now probably is premature. I am suggesting to leave that open for now, with the understanding that the performer that we are seeing today can get us more than 50, with all the money that we set aside, can still get us more money than we need to go up with our renewable portfolio standard to 50% and to buy an additional greenhouse gas to boot. But the approach that I'd like to take is not to take that to market at this point. I would rather not let the suppliers know that we are coming in with 2,000 gigawatt hours, along with the 2,000 gigawatt hours that the peninsula is coming with, asking for renewable resources. Renewable resources are not out there that you can build overnight. So when you overnight ask for additional supply, 4,000 gigawatt hours, the likelihood is those suppliers are going to take that as an indication for them or a sign for them to go ahead and push the rates on these resources up a little bit, just enough to still keep you in, but give them enough money. So I'm asking you not to let me, or not to have the authority set a number now. Let me have a chance to talk with our consultants, and I'm going to be meeting with them actually on Monday and Tuesday. And I'm going to be meeting with other CEOs also on Monday, and a few other friends that I know in the industry that have just gone out with RFPs, and just get a sense of what we should expect out there. Let us put the RFP out, and once we get the results, then we will for certain know how much renewable resources we want to need to have and how much greenhouse gas free resources we want to have. We want to be able to do trade-offs if we need to. If, for example, I can get 45% renewable resources, but be able to push the greenhouse gas by 15% over what we were thinking, and I can get that for the same price, then that is more likely what I will come back to you to recommend. So flexibility is important if we want to negotiate something that will make sense for the authority. And so that's why tonight I'm not coming to you with certain numbers to say this is the floor of what type of resource we're gonna go out and buy. With that, Mr. Chairman, that is my report, and glad to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions on this side first? Rob?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Habashi, it's kind of referencing the discussion that you had with Chair Sinks and I when we met with you since the last meeting. You have put, kind of the basis for your 1% is, a lot of it is based on this idea of keeping rates stable for certain customers, and I assume it's kind of medium and large customers this is important to. I had, and others, I think, the idea that it would be nice to be, give more of a break from PG&E to start with to kind of help prove it, but you argued that, rate stability is more important. So could you talk a little bit more why rate stability is important to these big customers and how that will really make the difference for them to choose us over PG&E?
Well, I can tell you from experience that talking to some of the customers that I've had in a different career, large ones, and talking to the energy specialists who budget it based on a certain price for the electricity. And when I went to him with the good news about dropping the rates 2% because we found some money, and his answer was, please don't do that. I have a budget. If I now reduce the amount of money that I'm paying out my next year, which I got to go to my boss and talk to him about next year's budget. And now he's going to give me less money for the energy because he is counting your 2% to happen indefinitely. So can you just hold on to this until next year? I mean, this is how sometimes some folks think of how they want the stability of the funding. They value that. Now, personally, I think stability of rates is very important. That's why every utility that I know of, every public utility that I know of, sets aside a rate stabilization fund for those rainy days or those bad years when prices go off the chart. That's the time when they go pull money out of the rate stabilization fund instead of having to turn around and push their prices up by 10, 20, or 40% like PG&E did 1 year. Now, PG&E is obligated to change their rates as often as they want to reflect the changes in supply prices. And so they do it. They don't necessarily need to please the customer. They just want to make sure that the CPUC is happy and the shareholders are happy. And they do their best to please the customer, but as long as the CPUC and their shareholders are satisfied, then they're okay with that. And they are forced to go and change their rates all the time. And that is why probably you see all those CCAs coming online, because they feel like the customers could do better with a community-based organization that will have steady rates, that can bring in additional renewable resources and reduce greenhouse gas in their area. I hope that answers your question.
I think so. If I could just add a little bit onto it. So also along these same lines, then I believe you're saying it's important to build financial reserves because there may be times where we have to pay spikes in what we pay for it, but you don't want to translate that through to the customer if it's just a short-term spike. So we'll actually get less money, use our reserve to try to keep them steady for our customer. Is
that is correct,
plan?
and that's why we need to build a rate stabilization fund. In most places that I've worked at, we had a floor and a ceiling for the rate stabilization fund. So if we accumulate a certain amount of money where the money we saved is above a certain dollar amount, then we do a rate reduction. And if we start consuming the rate stabilization fund in order to keep the rate stable, and we get to the point where we hit the floor, that's the time when we start thinking about raising rates.
Thank you. I'll give others a chance.
Great. Howard? And then...
Sure, I got sort of two lines of questioning. So renewable versus greenhouse gas free. It seems like what you'd like from us is the flexibility to figure out that mix between the two of them. And
the conventional.
Yeah, well, what's left will be conventional, right?
Yes.
You know, many of us are really worried about global warming, so maybe for this group, do you need direction that says we'd rather prioritize greenhouse gas free over renewable to start? I mean, do you need additional guidance?
Well, renewables are also
I get that.
gas free.
They're just maybe more expensive because there's other greenhouse gas free sources that may be cheaper for us at this time.
You bring in a very interesting point, and I can tell you that after the couple of dry years that we had, hearing from some of my friends that greenhouse gas free, which really translates into hydroelectric, that the legislators in their wisdom decided that is not renewable because there's too much of it in the north and not enough in the south. But what I've heard is that in the last year, greenhouse gas-free power, the premium for that has gone a little bit higher and actually is now higher than the premium for the renewable. And that's why I'm saying let's see what's out there in the market, and we should be able then to decide, do we get more renewable versus greenhouse gas, or do we get more greenhouse gas versus renewable, and get the proper mix in a way that will minimize our cost?
So let's talk definition, just because I don't want to get fouled up on this. There's the state definition, which excludes large hydro, which is their political stuff. If I'm really just interested in the environment, there are many sources that are not included in the state's definition that produce no carbon. Are we considering all of those are on the table?
Yes.
Okay. And then just in terms of how we actually procure power, I brought it up at a previous meeting. I just want to reassert that we should try not to use unbundled certs. We should try to make sure that all of our power is certified at source rather than going on the rec market afterwards. Maybe that's just commentary. Let me just ask a question on the finances just a little bit. See, there's the $20 million. There's the little bit of money we've given up front. There's the $20 million, and there's the working capital, and you had the different potential sources. I am assuming that in addition to the $20 million, that we're going to end up with lines of credit from our suppliers and potentially even bank lines of credit. most of which we plan not to tap, but is sort of necessary in case something were to hiccup. Is that your intent? Or is your intent just to focus on the 20 million?
Yeah, the intention, good evening. The intention in the first year is that the $20 million would serve as the working capital we need in order to bridge the time between when we start program operations and when we begin collecting revenue. And so there would be an ongoing periodic return to the financing sources for additional funds as we do new contracts over time. But that $20 million is all we think we need up front to get us started. And we wouldn't need to come back to the member agencies for any additional financing questions after that.
I get that. But we talked last time, I brought up the same sort of issue. It hasn't been reflected, and I will reassert that if you don't need the money, you can get all the money you want. And as soon as you need the money, we're screwed. And so I will reassert that I think that you need to pursue more than the $20 million, at least in terms of lines of credit and in terms of arrangements with suppliers. Again, it's about not having just one credit card in your wallet, but having a couple credit cards, never needing to use them, but just in case, if we get the flat tire on the road, we're going to need the money. And so I think that a monotonic financing plan, even though all the math says 20 million is more than enough, and I get it, I think that the plan needs to have some fallbacks. And the fallback normally would be a line of credit, normally secured from a bank, maybe backed by the cities, eventually backed by our cash flow, or maybe there, you mentioned the suppliers, and I don't know how those arrangements or terms would work out, but I do think we need another level behind the 20 million, which we never intend to use. Sounds like we didn't have any discussion about that. You're just focusing on the working capital at this time.
Well, just to add, the RFP that we send out there does have or ask the banks to tell us we want $20 million. That could be a loan or it could be a line of credit. And if it's a line of credit, how much guarantee you want behind it. What we've seen the bank ask for is about 50% of that, and that's the guarantee that we're going to have to come back to you and ask that the cities provide, because we obviously cannot provide. Please remember that, to your initial point, that we were talking about only about $8 million working capital when we start talking about needing some money up front.
Yeah, and I gave my whole pitch of we should get more than we need. Yeah, well, so I'm happy with the 20 million. I really, really am.
So I think that is pretty decent number. I think it will keep us on a reasonable financial footing, and whether that to be a line of credit or just a straight loan that we can pay over time, I think we'll be okay, especially given the performer that I've seen so far. According to Melody, in a few years we will be, what was the term, Melody? We're going to be swimming in cash, I think.
Yeah, well, we've looked at the same sorts of things, and we are very optimistic about what we can do for the environment. But again, I think there's a word of caution on the financial, especially if the rate structure changes as the geopolitical environment changes. Having more money available than you could ever conceive of using to start is a good way to go. There are people up here who probably had bankruptcies in their startups for lack of funding. So those were my two questions.
I'm going to see if we can focus on questions now. We do need to take public input on this item, and then we'll get back to member comments and motions and whatnot after that. So Liz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification, PG&E has peak time rates and so forth. Would we be following the same pattern of that peak time rates and then keeping it 1% below that, or are we looking for a steady across the whole year?
We intend to follow the rates as they may change from time of day rates, basically,
Yeah.
peak time and shoulder time.
So we'll follow the same pattern.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Daniel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Last month, the PEA advisors presented several different models, and I assume the model that you're talking about this evening is a supercharged model.
For the phased-in, yes.
For the phased-in. And in that same presentation, they presented $8.3 million in credit for startup operations and $16 million in financing. And so today you're recommending an additional $4 million. What has changed between this month and last month? And just a follow-up question to that, and does a pro forma budget still apply, or should we redo that?
The pro forma budget, the numbers haven't changed. What did change is I've based the working capital that I'm asking for based on a full year of operation. And I believe, and I'm going to let John jump in and talk about the assumptions that they used to come up with the $8 and $60 million. That was more based on how we're going to phase in the program. So it took into account the fact that we're not paying 100% of the cost or expected cost of annual expenses in the first year, because we're phasing in the program over time. And John, maybe you want to jump in.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. There is a difference relative to the supercharged scenario that was presented last month, in that we've moved the large industrial customers from phase 3 to phase 2. So that's a little bit of a difference. But in regards to the financing, what we presented, really that 8.3 million, if that was the right number, it would be kind of the minimum amount that's needed to get you through. And I think what we're talking about now is more in line with the concept of making sure that you have plenty of capital available. So I think the $20 million is really has a bit of a safety margin to it that the 8.3 did not. The 16 million that was referenced last month, that was not additional financing that's required. What that was is the assumption is that we would be able to negotiate with the power suppliers a slightly extended timeline for payment, and that was worth $16 million. So if we don't pursue that kind of strategy in the supply negotiations, we would need the extra 16 million, but the assumption was we'd only need that 8. All right, so there's, I just want to be clear, it wasn't 24 million that was required or was presented last month. It was really just that 8 million.
So under this new scenario, or the supercharged scenario, does that at the end of 2017, does that 12.3 million surplus still apply?
The numbers have changed because we now have a different phase-in than what was presented last month. I mean, there's still surplus, but it's going to be a different number.
Higher or lower?
You know, I'd have to look at it. It's comparable, but you know, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, on this side, Tony.
Tom, I was trying to grapple with this power mix question, and maybe I have it figured out in my mind. I wanted to make sure I understand. Normally, you would set a policy on the power mix, and maybe a reserve policy too, and come up with the rate you need to support that. In this instance, we're saying the rate is going to be set by PG&E. We're setting the reserve, and so you want flexibility on the front end to make the math work. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, yeah, and you're perfectly correct. The normal rate calculation for any utility, including PG&E and all the public utilities out there, is you start by forecasting your demand. You define the least set of resources, including the ones that you have already, along with the ones that you can buy from the market, that will meet that demand and that will give you the supply costs. You add to that other costs, your staff, your all the other costs that you have in your operation. You combine them all together, and that becomes your cost of service. And then you take the cost of service and you allocate it among your customer classes. Now, keep in mind, all that takes quite a bit of time. You allocate that among your customer classes, and from there, you define what the rate for each class is going to be like. And I can tell you right now, if we do it that way, one, it's going to take a lot longer, and two, you may end up with rates that don't resemble PG&E at all. And then you're going to make it a whole lot easier for a lot of people to turn around and say, maybe I ought to stay with PG&E. We are starting a business, and generally, for most people who do start a business and trying to compete, they look at the price leader and they set their prices there. They don't go the conventional way of calculating what their price ought to be, but they see what the price leader is and they go from there. 4 or 5 years down the road, I guarantee you that I'm going to come back and talk to you about calculating rates probably very differently.
So ultimately, we would get to that style of rate setting
course.
probably. And then I did have another question, and John, I guess it's for you. In the phasing plan, you have street lighting in the third. I'm not sure who. I shouldn't attribute this to you, so I'm sorry if I. But street lighting is in the third phase. It occurs to me that not actually for the city of Morgan Hill, but for the majority of us, street lighting is our biggest electric bill. And so it seems to me we should be first. I mean, we shouldn't be holding back or in any perceived way. Well, for 2 reasons. One, we don't want to be perceived as holding back and not being part of the initial group just for saying we want to put our best foot forward. Secondly, we're going to be saving money. We want to be first too. So I guess I would just ask if there's a problem with somehow switching some of that stuff. And I'm not sure.
You're bringing up a good point. I want to ask John to address it.
Right. I don't think there would be a problem with that. The reason, just the justification for putting it in the third phase is from the authority's perspective, the streetlight accounts are not large revenue, generators. So they kind of put at the end from that perspective. But we didn't really think about it from the municipality's perspective. It's not a big amount of money for the authority. That customer class is pretty small. So I don't think it would make much of a difference financially to the authority if that was, served sooner rather than later.
If you allow me, John, is it work-wise, does it create a lot of work for the authority early on, or?
No, I don't think so. It's just they were just sort of included in the miscellaneous category. I mean, there was no more to it than that, to be honest. So that phase 3 was agricultural, traffic control, street lights, sort of everybody but residential and the commercial customers. I don't think it would create any real problem to move those up if that was the desire.
To that extent, if that's something that you want to do in phase 1, and you move it that way, we'll certainly accommodate it.
Could I piggyback on that?
I'm done.
Since we're supposed to be leading the charge, I'd like to piggyback on that. Yeah, I would think the municipalities would want to say, hey, residents, we're doing it. We're taking the lead on this. We're going to do it. You should follow along. And I think a public perception would be people might be hesitant if we don't do it first. And if the cities lead, then hopefully it will make the residents follow along. So I strongly recommend that we go along with that. That's a very good, anything, the streets lights, what you were talking, the signals, even though it's not small, I think it's a huge perception and could be good PR for us.
Yeah, the other idea that other programs have gone with is including all of the municipal facilities in phase 1, regardless of their rate classification.
Jeannie?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back in terms of looking at it in terms of the customers that are going to be, that are waiting for this, and then we have the customers who are clueless about this, okay? So when I look at trying to figure out the value propositions to our different classes of users, okay, we've talked a little bit about, rate stability as one of them. Another one being that some sort of price differential between what we're offering versus PG&E. But it seems to me there's also a third dimension to this, which is that energy mix. So if I'm really, if I'm, part of the environmental group in our communities, that's really important to me, right? If I'm probably someone who's not really aware at all, as a resident, price is probably the thing that motivates me. If I'm a larger scale user, maybe it is that rate stability and such. I'm just trying to understand, how does we come to so is the rate stability, is that across all of our classes of users here as the most important of those 3 value propositions? Again, if we're looking at, this is a program, when we roll it out, you have to actually opt out of it. So is that still the thing that kind of keeps people to stay with the program? And particularly when I come from a philosophy of, with all the stuff that comes through our mailboxes, and everything is about, opt out, opt out. There's a lot of people who are just conditioned. You automatically start opting out of things, and that's not the way. We don't want that reflex on this one. We want them to ignore that and stay in the program. So is really rate stability the right thing? And so that 1% giving us that buffer really the right thing in the appetite of the user classes?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, which is, does rate stability good enough for just about every customer that we're going to serve? And I suggest not. I think each customer class will have its own value proposition, so to speak. I think and if I were to think on their behalf, residential customers are more likely to be looking for that additional renewable resource, greenhouse gas free, the environmental aspect of the service that we're going to provide. And I believe that's what's going to keep them from checking that box that says I'm opting out. I think for the small commercial, medium commercial, they see 1%, they're happy. They see anything below PG&E, they're happy. If they see stable rates, that will take them, and the way we have it, it's going to take them for 21 months at the same rate. They're probably ecstatic because their expectation is the rates is going to go up every year like it has been forever, for the exception of 1 year here and 1 year there. So the value proposition for them is the steadiness of rates and also that 1%, because it's better than nothing. For the large customers and industrial customers, I think the value proposition is going to be, what is it that you can do to help me function better? Maybe you can buy that solar that I built. Maybe you can support building solar with me on my rooftop, because I have, as well as you do, I have certain obligations to reduce greenhouse gas. So my guess is for the large customers, they're going to be coming to us saying, I need something more than the 1%, or even the steadiness. And for that, I am suggesting that we hurry up and bring some key account customers that work for this agency, so I, as well as they, can go out and talk to the largest 250 customers that we have in our service territory, hopefully in the next few months.
And then one other question. So if we deal with this proposal that says, the 1% differential between, how we're setting our rates, basically based on the PG&E rate and holding it steady, do we feel confident then that we will get a clean or greener, from the consumer's point of view, product for that rate, and we can get a big enough differential in terms of the clean or green?
Yes,
label?
everything in the performance so far, when we looked at 50% and 25% of greenhouse gas free, and all the other things that we've shared with you tonight, putting money aside and rates being 1% below PG&E, we still found a little bit of cushion at the end. So it is possible, if things hold and if the numbers are correct when we get back the proposals from the suppliers, that we may be even able to do more.
Thank you.
So I had a couple of questions also. Do we know what PG&E's history has been on rates, say, since 2000? Do they ever lower rates? Does it just go up, despite the fact carbon's been going down and renewables? I mean, solar power has been going down.
I think from the numbers,
Is it just up?
John can comment on that, but I've seen at least a graph that show 1 year drop. Was that 2014 or 2015, John?
Yeah, that sounds about right. They do go down, and really what tends to happen is the total rate goes up, but the generation rate can go down depending on what's happening in the market. So we have certainly seen that, and I think 2014 was a good example of it.
So consumers were charged less in that year than the prior year?
Well, what tends to happen is that the other charges of PG&E's business, the wires and the distribution system, those costs tend to rise pretty steadily. And so usually it's an overall rate increase for the customer, but if you're only focusing on the generation piece, which is particularly relevant to us, that can go down. it generally goes up, but and that is an uncertainty because, of course, we're not launching until 2017, and you know, we can't know really what the PG&E rate is going to be in 2017. We certainly know what it is today in 2016, but that is an uncertainty. So there is a chance that the PG&E generation rate could go down. We're seeing low prices in the market. There's a chance, and we've actually seen an indication from PG&E that the exit fees will go up in 2017.
Right.
So we're trying to incorporate the information as it comes in, and we get better information as the year progresses. But you know, it should be understood that you know, PG&E's rates could go down.
Sure. So the decision we have tonight, you're looking for our general direction, but we will revisit this presumably in February of 2017. That is, you're going to set up modeling, you're going to set up finances if per a policy that we adopt tonight, but our strategy could change. We have the ability to modify it within certain financial parameters, I'm assuming.
I think the earliest that you can look at these policies one more time and ask, do we want to tweak it, will be when we get the proposals from the suppliers and begin to look at the proper resource mix, given the amount of money that we anticipate that we're going to have after we go online.
So what I'm hearing is you'd like to hold this policy, and then we will, what is more likely to change is our renewable mix. Okay. And now if I understand correctly and for clarity, what you're proposing to do is we wait till the first of the year when PG&E publishes their then current rates. We will know as of February, say, what the PCIA will be, and you're proposing to then offer a discount net of the PCIA to the customer of 1% across all rate schedules that PG&E offers.
Is it net of the PCIA? Is that correct, John? Or do you add the PCIA, then you drop the 1%?
Right. So the PCIA would be accounted for so that, you know, when you add that to the bill,
it'll look like a net 1%
total
less.
is 1% less than the PG&E generation rate would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you would propose holding that till, say, 2019.
January 2019, that's correct.
January 2019, at which point we could adjust, and you think this will be a big advantage in us attracting business customers, so I get that. So let's say then if the PCIA goes up at the end of 2017, we might be in the hole a bit relative to where we were. I mean,
yeah, if you notice that in the policy that we ask them for to keep the rate steady at 1% below PG&E, we put a caveat in there that basically say that if you have a substantial volatility in the price of generation, which of course takes into account the PCIA, then we may come back to you. And when I say volatility, I don't mean just a rise in prices. It could be a drop in prices. Then we can come back to you and revisit with that policy that you established.
okay. And then, let's see. What do you expect our cash flow balance to be in the expected scenario? What will its lowest point be? This is going to Howard's questions about, and how big a pad do we need? I mean, we could talk about a lot of money, but I'm interested in knowing how much of a cushion we create under the normal or expected scenario.
And I can just give you off the top of my head, we're looking at 5% set aside that comes in a normal steady year when everybody's in to about $12.5 million. Off that, we're looking at about close to $700,000 and $750,000, maybe $700,000 to pay back the seed money. Another roughly $4.5 million to pay back the capital funds that we borrowed from you and others.
Mm-hmm.
So the combination of that is a little over $5 million. Subtract that from 12.5, then you get about $7 million left over 5 years. That's about $35 million.
Yeah, let me just ask, what do you think the minimum cash balance we'll ever have in the first 5 years will be?
At the end of the 5 years or just?
No,
year
what's
by
the
year?
lowest at any one time that our cash balance
month to
would
month?
dip to?
John?
The question of whether or not we're creating a big enough.
Right. So right now, it looks like it'd be about $10 million, assuming we get, we've got the $20 million to start.
All right, and assuming a normal model of 4 to 6 weeks to collect and all of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I got it. Unless there's a burning question, I'd like to go and
Well, we
take.
had some more board people would like to ask.
You have more questions or comments?
I'd like to do both, if that,
Okay. What I'd like to suggest is we do questions. We hear
Okay.
from any public input, and then we come back for comments and
okay,
motions.
let me just do the question
Yeah, please.
first. And this is in line with Mr. Miller's original comment about that I'm anticipating that what we're talking about when we're talking about the money is not that we're looking at this as a loss leader in some way, shape, or form, but that what we're looking at is working capital with regard to this. So, and I've heard commentary on both sides, and I just want to hear. I mean, my understanding is that we'll be negotiating contracts, and we'll be negotiating contracts that will be presumably good for a year or 2 years or something, and we can predictably sell that power, and we can compute accurately what that will cost us. And we're not anticipating that this $20 million is going to be used to subsidize various areas of various percentages that we will be selling the power for. I've heard both sides of that, so I want to hear what, you talk about we will be charging based on PG&E rates, but you're the one that's going to be negotiating the contracts. Are we going to be pre-digging a hole possibly with that estimate, or how do we know that we're going to be profitable here?
We are looking at the financials now over a 5-year period based on the indicative market prices that we are seeing. I want to go back to the $20 million and just assure everybody the $20 million goes into a savings account. You pay out of it the supplier, and 6 weeks later, the money that you paid out comes back plus. And after 2 or 3 years, probably, you'll be able to give that $20 million back to whomever you bought it from. It's just an amount of money that's a cushion working capital that would allow you to stay afloat as you pay your suppliers while wait for the money to come in from your retail customers. So that's for the $20 million. I may have missed the second part of the question.
Thank you.
Okay, John, more questions?
More questions. Yeah, so I have a list here, so I'm trying to put them in my simple mind. So this 1% that we're doing it is based on what PG&E, so whatever PG&E decides to charge in December, we're going to go 1% below it.
Yes.
January.
And that has, so if our costs are higher than PG&E, we're going to be subsidizing that, correct?
I don't see that to be a likelihood.
But it's a potential, correct?
We probably going to be very clear about that once we get the proposals from the suppliers and once we calculate the cost of the operation over a 1-year period. If we look at that and we add to it my pay and Melody's, and we find that to be higher than that's going to cause us to push our rates above PG&E, then we certainly have a much bigger problem than where to set our rates. The assumption today is, based on the numbers that we are seeing today, that when we charge PG&E, when we charge 1% lower than PG&E and pay for the market prices for the energy and pay for all the other expenses, and we push aside 5% to pay for our debt and put some money in rate stabilization fund, with all that, we're still going to have a little bit of a cushion left.
Okay, so Okay, that's one of our exposures. We're not sure of what that's going to be yet until that date. My other question is then, we're going to say, are we telling our consumers that their rate will not go up for 2 years? Because you're saying we're going to try to keep it unless there's some volatility in the wholesale price. We're telling our customers that we're not going to change this until 2019. So when we go out and marketing it, are we saying 2019?
Yeah, we're going to keep the rate steady until 2019.
16 to 20 months.
So the customers, that's what they're signing up for. Now,
They're not signing up, by the way. They only opt out. They already opted in the minute we are in business. They're already in. They don't sign for anything. They just basically don't opt out.
okay, but they're opting out they're coming on board in the anticipation that their rates won't change for 20 months. Okay. Now, you were saying if there's a rate reserve, we're accumulating that. So there's a potential that if the rates change and after 12 months, we haven't accumulated enough to pay off or keep above board then? Is that a potential downside?
To the extent that we have not accumulated enough, and to the extent that given steadying our rates while PG&E's rates are going substantially up, and that we don't revisit with ours, then whatever money we accumulated in the first year, we have to put some of it back, yes.
Okay. So if we have to raise our rates before the 12 months is up, or the public perception, have you experienced that, where we say, we're going to give it to you for 2 years, or 20 months, and after that, but something comes along and we have to bump it up? Have you had that experience before?
I would say probably a number of times when we went with a rate adjustments in the cities that I worked at. We always caveated that with provided that there are no substantial movement in the supply market.
Okay.
Because you always have to account for that. You can't just offer a steady rate for 21 months, then have the market go way north on you and you don't react. You just have to have that caveat all the time. Now, I don't remember ever having to use it, but it was always there.
Okay, because we are going, this is new, and the perception to the consumer immediately will be, yeah, they're concerned about it, and they're probably paying more attention to it, so I'm just worried about that. That's a comment, so I'll save that for later. On the revenue allocations, you said the reserve, maybe it's the wording that you do have, so we're doing the reserves, and in your memo here, it says we're going to pay back the initial investment from and build working capital and create a rate stabilization fund from the reserve. So wouldn't we be paying back the initial investment as we go along? Or you're saying we will hold back for a couple of years before we start paying back the initial investment?
The initial investment, we will start to pay back the month we are in operation. So when we begin to actually get money, get revenue from the customers for the work that for the supply that we have given them, that's the time when we're going to start paying back.
Because the way I'm reading it says that you're taking it out of the reserves. And so that's what I'm trying to clarify it if that's the way I read it.
No, we're not paying it. We are obligated to pay it back over a 4-year period from the day we start operation, and that's exactly what we will do.
Okay. Also, then down below it says we're going to same reserve accrual reserve accrual in a shorter period of time, but such an approach may compromise the authority's ability to acquire cleaner resources. Why would that affect our ability to acquire cleaner resources if we acquire more reserves sooner?
To the extent that you push money aside for reserves, then you're taking money away from either giving a rate break to the customer or buying cleaner resources, because the cleaner resources come at a premium. The money is, you add it all and it's going to come out always the same. If you want to lower the rates more than 1%, then you have to give up on buying renewables or give up on some renewables. If you want to raise the reserves, then you need to give less to the customers in terms of rate reduction or give up on buying more renewables. It's just the money's going to go to do one thing or another, either rate reduction, increase reserves, or buying renewables.
Now, on the screen here, it says maximize reduction of greenhouse gases. Do you recommend a goal, or are you going to reserve that for a while, that the cities or this organization should do?
I would, if you just give me until next month, give me a chance to talk to the experts, give me a chance to talk to the people that have been doing this for some time. I should be able to come back and talk about a goal to the extent that I don't have to be very definitive. That gives us a little bit of leverage when we go out and negotiate supply contracts.
Okay. And have you ever thought, as we go along there with our cities, I know we're going to be accumulating extra funds for various programs. Has there been any thought of allocating that money back to cities so that they can do their own measuring of greenhouse gases if the cities aren't able to do that?
Be honest with you, I've never thought about it. The one thing that I can think that could be done is if we eventually go to the CEC and PG&E and manage to get the money that are set aside for customer programs, then we can use that money to do any programs that we need to do in our service territory, including programs for the city facilities and whatnot. But we don't have that money yet. The only money that we're going to be able to bring in is the money that we will use to buy supplies.
Okay, thank you.
More questions, Daniel?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Habashi, you talked a little bit earlier about setting the customer class rates, and I just want to get some clarification. In terms of the industrial, commercial, residential, and agricultural rates, is there going to be one unique rate, or are there going to be separate rates for each of the customer classes?
The separate rates always have been.
Pardon me?
They've always been separate rates for each customer class, and sometimes they even differ as far as summer and winter.
I mean, and there are multiple rate schedules within a customer classification. So you might literally be talking 30 rate schedules that would be offered, and those would be, the discount, the 1% discount off of the PG&E equivalent. So it'd be more than, a handful of rate schedules that you'd be looking at. If you want to make sure that all customers sort of face that same deal, because if you force a customer onto a different rate schedule, they won't see that 1% savings necessarily, right? So it's important, I think, if that's the policy to offer that 1% discount to all the customers, that you have a similar, essentially the same set of rate offerings as does PG&E, and that would be probably in the 30 to 35 separate rate schedule range.
And just to reiterate that, each of those rate schedules would have on average about a 1% discount.
Yes.
Yes, okay. And then in terms of the startup capital, the discussion with Director McAllister, did you state that from the $20 million in startup, you were going to take 5% of that and set that in reserves immediately? Or are the reserves going to be built out as revenue comes in?
No, you will set the reserves as the revenues come in. The $20 million is the money that you either borrow or have as a line of credit, either from the banks or from the members. And that money is just being used for working capital. The reserves are coming from the revenues as the revenues come in, and some of it will go to pay the seed money, some of it will pay the cities back for the capital funds that they gave us for the $20 million. And then some will be set aside in reserves, in rate stabilization reserves, to be more specific.
So it is a potential risk to the startup of the JPA that in the first year, without that rate stabilization, we may have to increase the rates if our forecasts are wrong.
They gotta be really wrong. I mean, they really have to be wrong.
And then in terms of last month, there was a presentation again by John here, and the proposed RFP timeline was to start in June 2016, and then have the short list done by early October, short list by early August, and then final selections done by November. Is that timeline still on course, and are there any risks to the rates that you're presenting here today with that 1% savings?
I think we are on course, but I'll let John address the second part of the question.
Yeah, I think we'll start a little bit later on that RFP process, but end at the same time. I think that November timeframe's about right, where you'd be looking, that's about the right time frame to be signing the power supply contracts. But the actual RFP, we talked about that over the last few weeks and felt that we could actually really begin working on that in earnest in July and still get there.
And if I understand correctly, some of the comments that have been made during this dialogue, one of the things that you stated was we have to really watch what the other community choice programs are selecting as their product mix, because that will consume a lot of the demand, and therefore that could change the rates that were offered. So can you help me understand at what point at what point in the RFP do we put our product mix out there? Do we wait for the other CCEs to finalize their RFPs and get into contract, or do we try and hedge the bet and do it up front?
I don't know how many CCAs are out there, aside from the Peninsula, which they probably already out with their RFP. Is that correct, John? Or they're still working on it?
Right. They'll be done within the next few weeks. So I don't think we need to worry about what that program's doing in regards to our timeline. There is another program out there in LA County that just recently released an RFP. I don't think we necessarily need to adjust our timeline as a result of that. I think it's really more important to start the process and start getting pricing, and then through that sort of iterative process, we can adjust and kind of optimize that power mix depending on kind of the numbers that we're seeing for renewables, for greenhouse gas free, and if there are already step ups if we say, well, what if we want a little bit more of this product? Does the price still hold? I think it's going to be a bit of an iterative process that way. I don't think it may be influenced sort of indirectly by other programs and the demand that might be created in the market, but I don't think we need to necessarily adjust our timeline for that factor. It kind of is what it is, that's the only other program I'm aware of is the LA County program that would be active in the market at the same time as we would be for this program.
So the Peninsula CCE isn't competing with us, or
I'm just saying they'll be wrapping up their process, their solicitation process this month.
So maybe let me clarify my point here. What I'm trying to understand is there is only so much renewable energy sources out on the market. And as more people enter that, and depending on the product mix that those other CCEs are trying to offer their clients, their customers, more of that is consumed. Mr. Habashi talked about the amount of time it takes to increase capacity of renewable energy sources, right? And that takes time, it's capital intensive. So what I'm trying to understand is if we wait too long, or if other people start consuming those renewable energy sources that are already on the market. We talked about, the cost of 1% of renewable energy sources is $500,000 to $1 million, right? So our costs can potentially go up just because market supply is being consumed, and that's what I'm trying to understand is how do we manage that as a board? And I think that's the flexibility you're asking for. Is that correct, Mr. Habashi?
Yes, and I do want to add that the suppliers are savvy people. They know when to push the price up, And if they feel like everybody's coming all at once, doubling up on the amount of renewables, then they're more likely than not will push the price up a bit. To the extent that we keep our cards close to our chests, so to speak, and wait until we get some indicative prices from the RFPs, then we're probably going to be better off, because those suppliers do want to keep us pushing up the percent of renewables, because they know that is eventually going to be money in their pocket that they can use to invest in more renewables and so on. It's just we don't want to go all out at once saying that we're going to be doubling up on renewables, then give those suppliers the leverage of being able to push the price up, and knowing that you already committed yourself to twice as much renewables as you should. On the other hand, I don't see why, if the prices come looking decent and the prices are still held down by the suppliers, I don't see why we shouldn't go out and commit ourselves for a 10-year supply, knowing that the price is pretty depressed now, but is likely to go up in the future, or do other things that probably not on a year-by-year basis. So just, again, give us a little bit of time to kind of get our heads around how we want to tackle with this and what approach we want to take with the RFP. And then we'll be able to see things a little clearer, that we can come back to you and say, it looks from everything that we see that this is the best direction that we need to take to maximize the amount of clean resources that we can bring in while we're keeping our costs down.
And just, thank you for that. And Mr. DeLassy, just for our understanding, what is the market utilization right now for renewable energy sources? Is it at 90% capacity? Is it at 50, 60% capacity? What is the utilization rate at right now?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. What I can tell you is that there doesn't seem to be any supply shortfall in regards to renewables, particularly when we get into 2017. And so all of the solicitations I've been involved with, we get many multiples of offers relative to the quantities that have been requested. 2016, incidentally, there's a unique regulatory aspect where this is the last year of a compliance period, a multi-year compliance period. So the supplies are a little bit tight for 2016. It's not really relevant to our discussion since we don't need any power in 2016. But once we get into 2017, the supply appears to be there. I don't have a specific utilization number. It's a little hard to get that, because if you think about it, the load is currently served by PG&E and it's now moving over. That means PG&E has excess. Question is, what are they going to do with that excess? Are they going to? Are we going to wind up, buying that indirectly through a marketer, or are they going to hold on to it? So it's hard to, look at sort of steel in the ground versus demand and come up with that utilization factor. But our experience is that we haven't seen nor have we heard from the suppliers that these numbers are going to be a problem to provide yet, anyway. It seems like at some point that's got to change, unless the utilities release their contracts as the load migrates. But still, since presumably all the CCE programs are going beyond just the status quo renewable amounts, that is putting demand in the market. So eventually, we're gonna we are gonna start running up against the available supply. We just haven't seen that yet. So I think the idea of moving quickly, of getting through this phase in that sort of supercharged timeline, there's a lot of good reason for that, to make sure that when we go to market, the supply is available, and we think it will be at this point, but we'll certainly learn as we go here if the story starts to change, but so far it has not been a problem.
Okay, thank you.
I know many want to comment with their questions, so I think maybe what we should do is take public comment at this time, and then we'll come back and bring it up here. So those of you who'd like to speak, we have 3 minutes per speaker. This is an important topic, and we'd welcome your input.
Thank you very much. My name is Bruce Carney. I'm a member of a group called Carbon Free Mountain View. I've had a chance to address many of you in the past. I think the presentation we've heard has been excellent. I've found it informative and find myself agreeing with almost all parts of it. I'd like to comment on 2 things. One is the importance of rate stability to various classes of customers, and the other is to talk a little bit about the supply and demand for new solar farms. So in the solar farm industry, demand creates supply. Someone says, I would like some solar, and someone else says, this is an opportunity for me to make money. What do you need to make money in the solar industry? You need land, solar panels, access to inexpensive capital, and access to the transmission grid. Sunshine. Yes, you need sunshine to have a good solar project. California has lots of sunshine, lots of cheap land. Solar panels are not in short supply, and their price is coming down. Capital has never been cheaper in my lifetime. The tax credits, by the way, are quite outstanding for both solar and wind at the present time. So the only real constraint to the near infinite expansion of solar in California at this time is access to the transmission grid. I'm not familiar enough with it to tell you how deep a constraint that is. But if all of LA and Santa Clara County and San Mateo County and other populous counties wanted to go out, maybe not all in the same week, but certainly in the same half-decade, they could acquire at good prices all the solar resources that they would ever want if the transmission grid were able to get that from where the sun shines to where the people live. So not to worry about that. Perhaps I can be corrected by this, but I'm 99% sure that those are the key ingredients and that they're widely available. In all the conversations I've had with others about CCE, we never really talked about rate stability as an important thing. Because rates are so terribly unstable for a PG&E residential customer, and all of us really represent residential customers, the anecdote about the impact of decreasing energy prices on the energy service manager was a good anecdote, but I'm not sure that's an anecdote I'd want to base policy on, even for the C&I class of customers. Given that 2/3 of the costs, as perceived by the customer, are in PG&E's hands, and only 1/3 of the costs are in our hands, promising or even indicating a desire for rate stability at the bottom line for the customer is not something that I believe that SVCE can do. If the waters are choppy, it doesn't matter how good the stabilizers on the boat are, the customers on the boat are going to feel choppy waters. When you think about, I'm out of time, so I'll say what we can promise right up front is we'll beat PG&E on price. There's no track record to say that we'll be able to provide stability, and so I don't think that should be part of our marketing to any class of customer.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm James Talea, resident of Sunnyvale, and I've recently joined Carbon Free Mountain View as well to coordinate between community groups in the area. And one thing I've been doing in the last few months is watching what PCE has been doing up in San Mateo County to see where there might be some things that can benefit Silicon Valley Clean Energy. One thing on this topic that I noticed was that they're doing what they're calling an early adopter program. Essentially, any resident that might find themselves in phase 2 or phase 3, but they really are eager to sign up quickly, to allow them to sign up, register, and join, be part of phase 1. It's not likely to be a lot. I don't know if there's any reason why Silicon Valley wouldn't want to do that as well, because you could identify some of your most interested and delighted customers, use them to help promote in other areas. But that's just one thing I haven't noticed in this plan to do something that PCE is doing as an early adopter program to just allow some people to move up in line if they're interested to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Seeing none, I'll close it and bring it up here for Further questions and comments?
Question? Right, can I make a?
Yes, please.
I'm wondering if the board would be willing to, when we're considering these items and making comments, to take them one at a time. So maybe we could focus our initial comments and make a decision on the program rollout, and then move on to the next so that we don't have a smattering of ideas.
I think that's an excellent idea. Okay, so number 1, program rollout. This is the ramp schedule and so forth. Does anybody want to?
I can take it.
Yes, Liz.
Yeah, I'm maybe not be able to following that protocol, because to me, it's the whole picture. So I'll try, but I don't think I'm going to make it. So what I've heard so far, and I think Director Harney started it off, is that in terms of program rollout, we are actually doing something different than we saw at the last meeting. So I think it would be helpful in the future as things change that we get an update of what that difference is. It's not the supercharged program. And it's also going to change a little bit tonight based on the comments about cities and their lighting districts, is what I heard. So the scenario, I think we need a little more comfort on the scenario. And that would come back to what the cash flow is that we've been all talking about. And when we do this 1%, my understanding is that as the money comes in, if we got an updated pro forma for the program, it would be easier to understand, because the other pro forma actually showed how the cash was building up in the different categories over time. So if we do the 1%, I think the 1% is fine with me, because I do think the continuity of the rates over the 2 years is a very good thing. I'm fine with the keeping the same categories as in PG&E. I think that makes sense. But I do think it's helpful to understand that if we're going to redo the 1%, and we're also going to be putting 5% in quote-unquote reserves, that's a total of 6% below the PG&E rate. It's my understanding that we are expecting, based on the previous pro formas, that we're going to be making more than that 6%. We're not going to be that tight. So when we talked about worrying about having to subsidize in the second year, we may in fact not have to do that, is what I was taking. I took it that these are fixed. We're going to reduce it 1%. We're going to put 5% away, but there's more money there that we're going to have to build up to cover us over the time frame. That, I guess I'd say the margin is bigger than the 6%, is what I took away from that. I'm fine on the mix being flexible, because I liken it to when you go buy a car, new tires for your car. If you buy two tires, you pay full price, but if you buy 4 tires, you get a third one free. So it allows you to negotiate what's the mix that you want. So I was fine with the mix going on there. Let's see. So I guess the only other thing is that I would just give us the caution that when we talk rate stability and 1% below PG&E, as several have mentioned, it's only a portion of the bill. So if we can't consistently say your bill's going to be lower, because we can only say the power portion of your bill is going to be stable, the whole bill is subject to what the whole bill is. So we have to be careful to make the public aware that we're not overcommitting, that their whole bill is going to be 1% lower. It's just the power source part. So if that's answering those one by one, but all at once.
Well, we'll take that. Howard.
I was going to be a little more linear, but it just seems like some of these things we've kind of talked through, so I would rather just jump out and make a motion on the first of the staff recommendations, which is I would move that we accept the staff recommendation number 1 with the following changes. We put all municipalities, not just streetlights, but all cities into phase 1. I think John made a great point. We should be up there leading. And one of the citizens made a great point. To the extent that it's possible, if there is some citizen that just is dying to be in an earlier phase, we should try to make a system that would allow somebody to move to an earlier phase.
Second.
There's probably a lot of other stuff to talk about. Let me just say that I am very happy to see a supercharged scenario, and then getting it all in 1 year I think has a tremendous number of benefits. And while I could argue different points of large versus medium and stuff like that, the practical reality is everybody's going to happen within a few months. So I'm very happy with this.
Okay. Discussion on the motion.
Yeah, so I guess I have a question back to staff. You're saying the motion is to actually move the municipalities up to phase one. And I guess the question I have is, does staff have enough information to say that that is sound versus rephrasing it to saying giving staff the latitude to bring the municipalities forward? Can you envision anything that would say that that was probably a dumb idea to bring it all forward because you haven't really thought it through?
Yeah, I'm off the top of it, and having done this in different places in the past, I don't think that should be a problem. That we can bring in all the facilities that belong to all the different cities, along with the street light and traffic light. I don't think that should be a problem. If it is, I will definitely come back to you next month and say that it is. But at this point, I think you can make that motion, and we should be able to accommodate it.
Okay.
So just because there was some question here, is your motion on the entire
It's just
policy,
no, just
or is it on?
program rollout policy.
Program rollout.
Yeah, I was trying to just break them up. This was
Okay, for
this
the
was
program
number
rollout
one.
policy, number one. All right.
Yeah, we'll do 5 of them was what I thought
Yes.
we were going to try to do.
Okay.
I concur. Okay.
Any other comment on number one here, program rollout? Question?
Just one more question, and that is, again, we're at the policy level, so I think this is great, and I'm going to support that motion. At what point might we see the details in terms of within any one of these phases, how we're going to determine who those 20% of the residential is, or who's in phase one versus phase two? Are we going to see that detail in September, October? Are we going to? When will we see the actual definition within each one of these?
Right. Well, that's a great question. It's really just the residential sector that is split among the 3 phases. Everybody else just breaks out based on their rate classification. So we're going to have to talk about the best way to break up and sort of assign residential customers to the phases. I know.
So we can assume that'll come back to the board at some point as if it's either an information item or an action item if you need our approval on.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think I think the assumption is that the desire would be that all of the membership is represented, that it's not done strictly geographically, where one city is in phase one and another city's in phase 3. So we'll work that up, but that would come back. That would come back to the board.
And I would just add that in the coming months, as we're building the staffing plan and as we're building the future communications plans, that's when we'll get to be more crystallized about how the phase out will happen.
Okay. And then my last question is this whole idea of the early adoption thing. I'm not sure. I understand it's in the motion. I'm just not sure I understand what that means. Does that mean, in your motion, does that mean if we're going to set 20%, but then if we have early adopters that take us above that 20%, we can bring more people into it, or
No, I just
other
wanted-
classes of users, or is it just?
No, it was not that sophisticated. If there's some gung-ho people out there that just want this right away in April rather than waiting for October or July, that they have a way to opt into an earlier phase.
Okay, again.
And again, the way I tried to word it was to the extent that staff can figure out a way to do that one, because that was the one I was less sure about.
Yeah, so that one, as long as it's clear, the motion
I think it's with that caveat, I would be a lot more comfortable, because if we end up going in with a zip code, it would be hard.
No, I was trying to put the caveat on it to the extent that it was possible. Well, with the cities, I figure it's all us. If our cities have a problem, it's probably us, not them. But with the individual customers, there are going to be some real advocates, and we should find a way to
So again, I think,
bond them.
if the motion is to the extent possible, we need to be successful, forget wearing our city hats, being the JPA hats. we've got to make sure that JPA is going to be successful, and if we're putting in artificial obstacles that's going to slow us down or cause undue complications, I would rather roll out simply. But again, if your motion is not that it has to accommodate early adopters, but with reasonable consideration for that, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I used some words that were something like that. I think that's the right way to go.
Okay.
Great. Rob?
Well, you've just touched on the subject I was really concerned about as I was, now, the early adopters, now you're talking about an opt-in program in addition to our opt-out program, which is a whole nother mechanism. And if this turns into, 1,000 people across the county, how much extra cost is this going to be? But I think Howard has qualified it to,
The extent,
if possible, if it doesn't cost too much kind of thing.
if there's a reasonable way to do it, great. If they come back and say, hey, look, we can only go by zip code, then we'll find some other way to say something super nice to the people who want, we'll send them weekly emails about how good the program is or something.
Phase 2 is only 3 months later.
Exactly. The whole thing is only a few months long. So
Six months, right? So,
yeah, that's the good news about the accelerated program. Anybody who feels left out, great.
Daniel?
Yes, thank you. Just in regards to the comments, I like the rollout program. A comment I would like to make is that, Gilroy probably has the largest percentage of agricultural customers. And, as many of you may or may not know, the ag business, they aren't really price setters, they're price takers. So if Walmart comes to the farmer that's growing bell peppers, Walmart will tell that farmer what his rate is going to be for his product. So 1% is really a 1% to his bottom line and 1% in profitability. So I would like to see that, along with the municipalities, that the agricultural business also moves up to phase 1, if at all possible, to provide some relief to the agricultural industry. In regards to the generation rates, I'm perfectly fine with the 1%. I like that stability, and I like the fact that if we can offer that stability to some of the customers that are really sensitive to energy costs. Again, coming back to Gilroy, we have the lowest median income of all the city counties, or all the cities in the county. Our average, our median income, household income is about $78,000. So 1% may not be a lot to some of our neighboring city clients, but in Gilroy it is a significant savings. I do agree with Director or Chair Miller here that we need to have as much working capital as possible. So coming back to the 20 million, if we could increase that, I think that would be good diligence on our part. And then finally, in regards to the product mix, I do support Mr. Habashi's recommendation that we don't set that right now, that we kind of wait to see what the RFP comes back with, look at the availability on the market, and then determine what our mix should be. Thank you.
Okay, any more comment on the motion, which is on program rollout? Seeing none, I think we could take a vote on this. And the motion, to summarize, is that we're going to take staff recommendation on program rollout, a schedule from April to October 2017. We're going to try to move all cities up into phase 1. We've heard some interest in agriculture and potentially early adopters if it doesn't impose too much of a burden on administration. Is that correct?
The motion does not include the agricultural as is, unless the maker of the motion and the seconder wishes to modify their motion, but that is not part of the motion.
I have to look at our CEO because I don't understand. I get agriculture, I get the businesses, I get the need. I don't understand. You had them in phase 3. Was that just clerical, or was there some real technical reason why agriculture was in phase 3? And would it be a huge issue?
I'm going to ask John to respond to that. I think that's originally I took the package as it was. So, John, agricultural.
Yeah, okay. So, well, I kind of feel like we're pushing a lot up into phase 1, but The reason that the agricultural was pushed off to phase 3 is really primarily financial from the perspective of cash flows. Some of the rates are just due to the time of use structure on some of the ag rates, they're very, very low. And you know, a lot of the users can really take advantage of the off-peak rates, and that's great for them, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily generate much cash in excessive expenses. So really part of the thinking in structuring this phase-in plan was, you know, let's kind of optimize the enrollments of the different customer classifications to set the agency off on the strongest financial footing, and so that's really kind of the rationale for putting them in that third phase.
My reason on the cities wasn't technical, it was PR, and I agreed with John McAllister that said it'd be really weird to say, hey, we want you all in this, but we're not showing up till later as the city. So that was really my motivation for wanting to move them. So I think I'll stand with the agriculture at a later phase. I will make the comment, 1% of the electricity cost, of which PG&E is constantly finding ways to schmuck the stuff onto the other side of the line. And so this is an uphill battle that we're going to have, and it's not going to make, for those who think our customers are going to save a whole bunch of money, it's not 1% drop into their bottom line, it's some amount of money. It will make a difference, but I don't think this is going to be the end-all, be-all on the 1%. But I'll comment when we get to that one.
Liz, did you have something?
Yeah, I did. I appreciate the political benefits of having cities come first to show that we're into this, but we're into it anyway, like everybody else. We're opted in. I mean, that's it. I think it's nicer for the cities to take a secondary or tertiary position so that the residents can take the financial benefit first. So I like the spread the way it was presented.
Okay. John.
Yeah, you know, we were talking about getting the word of mouth. This goes to communication. Oh, you're going to...
1 second, I just want to have one comment on the issue of the city facilities coming in the first phase. It is very likely that all the city facilities will come in the first phase because the first phase is small and medium commercial, and I think that brings in most of the city facilities. I think the only thing that we were talking about here is traffic light and street lights coming into the first phase instead of being in the third phase, which really very small, and it's not here nor there. So we have no problem bringing the street lights and the traffic lights, but the city facilities are coming in mostly in phase number 1. John, am I close to being right?
Because that's
Well, I think you're close to being right, but maybe you know, there may be some municipal facilities that would be in that more large commercial segment, right?
In phase 2?
And that would be phase 2, yeah, unless we decide, you know, to collect all the municipal facilities specifically and include them in phase 1.
It's 6 months, folks. That's it, from start to finish under this scenario. So
Phase 2 is actually 3 months after
yeah,
phase 1.
exactly.
I'd like to...
And more comments on this, or can we vote?
My question, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
So I would also, to the maker of the motion, we have advocacy groups out there that I would think would want to be our early adopters. I know Carbon Free Mountain View would like to be that, and so to help communicate and to blog and to text, if those people were early adopters, I think that would help our publicity quite a bit. And if there's a ways to accommodate the various groups, advocacy groups out there in the area, I think that would be a great way to get a good input.
Right.
What's Mountain View zip code again?
9404, 94041, 9043, 2043. But I mean, if you think about it, I mean, we got a group here that we have members right here that are out here. They're concerned about doing it, and you know, if we can get free press, good free press, this is the way we want to do it.
I have only one more question, which goes to the capacity. If we use Noble Energy or somebody else that's proven, what do we know about their business that allows them to do this in 6 months, given that they may be servicing other CCEs?
Uh,
Are we confident that they
I
can
mean,
do this?
we did circle back with
did.
Noble and did ask him the question, actually while we're in the middle of the meeting, deciding whether 6 months is going to be too fast. And their answer was, if you asked that question of us 6 months ago, our answer would be, that's going to be tough. But now that you're asking this question now, we can tell you with no room for doubt that we can do this on the schedule that you have planned.
And this is not just the sales guy talking.
I hope so.
I've been in these companies where, so you think they have the capacity, you understand enough about their business to know that they can scale?
That is what I got from them. If you ask me, do I understand enough about the business, I'd be lying to say yes.
Okay.
John probably.
I think their evolution, they're serving nearly 1 million customers now among the various programs. So, I think they've scaled up their systems
They have scaled.
already. Yeah.
All right.
And one more thing to add, we are going out for bid for that piece
Sure.
of the business. We're not just handing it to one vendor.
Thank you. Okay, more?
Now, I really would like to understand, really clear on this motion, okay? So it is as proposed. The accommodating early adopters is as feasible. It's not a given. But what I need is a clarification in terms of, now that we got a little bit further clarification from staff, are we talking about
Bringing in all the municipalities.
all municipalities, so which would mean all the municipalities that were already part of Phase 1, plus all the municipalities that were part of Phase 2, plus all the streetlights that were part of Phase 3. The motion is to shove all of that up into Phase 1.
And the traffic signals.
Right, that's why I said the streetlights, traffic signals.
Yes.
Well, again, I just...
Jenny just wants to be super clear, and that was what
wanna
I
be
intended, was
very,
all the
very clear,
municipal
because
stuff.
At one point, we were talking about moving the streetlights and the traffic lights up. We just got clarification that when we're doing this, it's not 100, the municipalities are in Phase 1 and Phase 2. They're 3 months apart from each other, and then, then we have the streetlights and such. So we're shoving the whole thing forward. And I'm going to go back to staff saying, that's not going to cause complications, or do you still need, that would be the goal, but if it's not feasible, it's okay.
I believe as far as the street lights, traffic lights, and the large city facilities being moved from Phase 2 to Phase 1, that is something that we can accommodate. I don't see a big problem because the logistics of it are not that difficult. I can tell you, I can't figure out yet how we're going to work out the logistics for the early adopters, because that means we have to send out notices to everybody to ask them who amongst you are early adopters, so we can bring you into Phase 1 just in case you are not already. Yeah. And that could be fairly expensive.
Might I suggest that this is a passive program? In other words, we have communication vehicles. We have a website. You can register on a website, but there's no need for us to spend a lot of money on Marcom.
It's a good idea, Rod.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
That's what PCE is doing, we hear. Okay.
There's 3 members out there now waiting to sign up. So.
Well, I understand. But it seems to me that people that are enthusiastic and have heard about the program could contact us rather than us reaching out.
I agree.
To the extent that we can, that could be done, then yeah, that makes it a little bit easier for us.
Well, and I think what we hear in the motion is we're looking at feasibility. So if this turns out to be expensive or burdensome, we'd want to hear more about it, right?
Yes, I think boards and councils and all, we're always tempted to move the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, and sometimes aren't clear about the unintended consequences. So I just want to make sure that I would rather our staff be moving us forward than having to slow down to reanalyze or rethink something, rejigger something. So as long as we got those words in there, I'm okay with the motion, and I'm ready to say, let's take the vote.
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Bruins that, the staff is already telling us that they have limited resources and asking them to do a feasibility study for early adoption, and then potentially spending money on mailers or disrupting the communication plan that they're already working on is, to me, is counterproductive.
Okay. Why don't we take a vote? Are we doing roll call here? No. All those in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain? Okay.
Can I just clarify, the two noes were Gibbons and Harney? Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go on to number 2 of the policies, electric generation rates. Comments here? Howard?
I'm happy with the 1% goal. I think that the whole thing is awkward anyway because it's such a small percentage of the bill, and PG&E is going to constantly keep us under pressure. I think 1%. If you ask me on the message, I think it's hard to message people 1% of some small fraction of something. It's going to be hard. I think we're going to have a clearer message. And I always thought the message would be cheaper and cleaner. And
Well, and if you're consistently below that on a rate table,
yeah,
then on any rate-
cheaper and cleaner. But I don't want somebody showing up saying, "Look, my bill was $100 last year, and it's $99.79. It's not 1% cheaper like you promised." I just hate to be in those debates.
Right. Liz?
I was going to make a motion that we approve the electric generation rates as presented by staff.
Second.
Second? Okay.
So then let me make an objection more formally then to what I was saying. That item number 2 is not just the 1%. That item also includes the promoting it as the 1% is sort of, and the rate stabilization is the key factors. And I don't believe that those should be the factors that we should be promoting. Again, I'm happy with the 1%, but it's the what are we going to promote part of it that I think we would be making a mistake if that was what we did.
I think, let me just be clear that we are asking for a policy to set the rates at 1% below PG&E. We still have time to figure out how the message is going to look like and how it's going to be presented. We're not voting on the message tonight. We're just voting on a policy to when we set the rates for the next 21 months, that rates will be set at 1% below PG&E.
Okay, then my confusion on just listening to the commentary and reading the stuff, if this is just about the 1%, I'm super happy with that.
Setting this policy, just so I'm clear, doesn't preclude us from changing the policy at some point if circumstances warrant. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, we can state our intention to be at 1% or make it policy, but there's nothing that would preclude us if PG&E or the CPUC does something that we didn't expect, we would have the ability to modify.
When we begin to send a message to the customers to notice them, we're probably going to tell them what the rates
What our
gonna look like,
intention is. Mhm.
and that will reflect the 1%. Of course, if something happens between now and the time when we're ready to send the notices, then we can have to work something different. And
Yeah.
sounds like
Okay.
is that good?
Jeannie?
So again, let me make sure from the discussion that what we're talking about is a net 1% discount from where PG&E rate is. So that includes the fee that PG&E has in there, right?
The PCIA, is that?
PCIA?
Yes.
So this is a net, so the policy or what the motion is about then is to set the rate 1% net.
PCIA.
Yeah, net of the PCIA, and that is 1% relative to the generation rate of PG&E.
Of the generation rate.
Not the total rate, which would be inclusive of transmission charges, distribution charges, all the kind of the delivery charges that are associated with
Okay.
it. But
And then I also want to make sure that we're clear that what we're doing is talking about the rate. We're not talking about the messaging. It's just the rate policy. And that's what the motion is, correct?
That is my motion.
Okay. I think this one's
Okay.
clean.
John? Well, is there a second to that?
Yeah, there was.
I'm calling the question, I'm sorry.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I have 2 questions. So I don't think we really talked about this. So we're talking about setting it 1% below PG&E net. We just had that discussion. Now, next, and we're talking about keeping this till January of 2019. So that means we'll have 2018 where the PCIA may go up on us. Are we going to lower our power rate to keep the net at 1%?
No, the rate it's saying.
I think the intent was to set it at 1% below PG&E right after we know what PG&E's 2017 rates will be, and keep it there,
Keep the rate.
regardless of regardless of where the PCIA will move the following year, or regardless of where PG&E's rates will move. Now, if we see substantial movement both in the PCIA or the rates, and keep in mind, the PCIA goes opposite to market prices. So if the PCIA goes up, market prices goes down, and we should be able to benefit from that. But again, we are setting the rates at 1% below PG&E rates as they are published in 2017, January of 2017, and keeping it at that level all the way until January of 2019.
Second question. So we're also going to match time of use, the same time difference, the same differences between each. If there's an EV rate, we're going to match the EV rate, all these different kinds of things they're doing.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. More questions, or are we ready to vote?
Call for the question.
You have your, does somebody have a mic on over here that wants to speak?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
You don't need a second for
Then I think we're ready for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. We'll move on to number 3, working capital requirement, level and sourcing. Would anybody like to make a motion on this?
I can do it.
Okay.
I'm happy with the 20 million, and this one I move the staff recommendation.
Second.
All right, very good. Discussion?
Yes.
John?
Yeah, I'm still, the wording, how you're going to pay back the initial investment through reserves, I'd like to see that it be clarified that it be more out of operating income and not out of reserves. A simple clarification if that's possible.
Isn't that item number 4 where we talk about paying that
Well, I
back?
mean, because you're talking about the reserves, maybe I did jump ahead.
What language are you concerned about?
I'm jumped ahead. Never mind.
Okay. Are we ready to vote on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. We'll move on to number 4, reserves and startup cost repayment. So if I understand correctly, we have income coming in starting in April. Our intention is to build a reserve over the first 5 years. Our intention is to secure debt financing, paying a fair rate of return between the rate we might get from a bank and zero, which is what our seed capital has gone in, and if I can use that term, to repay the seed capital beginning in April 2017. For those municipalities or the county that want to offer funding at a fair rate of return to be determined, that's the money that we would intend to hold for through this period, paying it back at the end of each year.
Yeah, over a 5-year period. yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I can read number 4, which is probably will address Director McAllister's concern. It says, General SVCE Authority Reserves Policy. It's recommended that the authority set aside 5% of annual revenues during the first 5 years of SVCE program operation for the following primary purposes. Then it goes on to describe what that money will do. Some is going to pay back the seed money. Some will go to pay back the capital funds assuming that we either borrow from bank or from you. And finally, the remaining will be set aside for rate stabilization fund. And that is the recommendation that's being made.
Well, isn't it the same thing if you say our reserves will be net and all these other items go up into the above the line? Reserves will be the excess after paying operating expenses, and wouldn't paying back the initial investment, part of our initial, that would be part of our operating ongoing expense? And so I visualize reserves as I've paid everything, here's left over.
I think I'm getting your point is what you're asking is I got operating revenues, I'm going to pay back the seed money, I'm going to pay back the working capital, I'm paying back my resources, and if I have some money left over, all that's going to go into rate stabilization fund.
Yeah.
But that assumes, of course, that we then have a specific resource mix that we're going to buy. Unless you're suggesting that, no, you can be flexible on the resource mix, but still, if you have any money left over after you pay all your debts, you can put that into the rate stabilization fund regardless of how much that is. Is that what you're asking? What I'm suggesting or what I'm recommending is to make sure that there will be a minimum of 5%. Maybe the wording should be a minimum of 5% set aside in order to pay for ABC.
May I offer a clarification?
Yes.
Please.
I'm going to take a guess because one of the things that I learned on the council is that we think of money and money pots a little differently and we use different names. So there's going to be the income, the revenue coming in. And within that revenue, there's going to be a 5% set aside that remains whole. It's built up to 5%. 5% of every month the money comes in, 5% of the money every month goes into this reserve account. And then there's going to be money from the revenue that's going to be paying operating cost, which is paying back debt, salaries, and everything else. And then the margin that's left is going to be the set aside money for, the seed money is the part of the debt being paid back, and the other one is if things go kabooey. What was the one you
Rate
said?
stabilization fund.
Rent stabilization fund. So if you look at it that way, there's an operating income, but then there are three ways it's going to be used: the 5% set aside, the operating expenses, and then the rate stabilization one. Does that help?
Yeah, and there's a chart on page 5 in 3 colors that shows after the first year, it's about $12 million a year, right? And of that, the green shows that portion, which is specifically for rate stabilization, and the blue is principal repayment on the debt.
Staff is just using the term reserve to cover all of it, and it's a little different than how we typically think of that term.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Staff in particular, is this a key item to get decided tonight? It seems to me it needs to be developed a little further. And so is this a really important point to be determined tonight?
I think it would help in the sense that it will define the amount of money that we have left for the power supply. It basically just say that we are committed to pay back the money we borrowed, and we are committed to set aside some money for reserves. That's why we're saying it's a 5%. We're going to set it aside, and we're going to forget about it. Then we have that pot of money left, which is going to be almost 90%, more than 90% of our operating revenues to buy resources with. And then whatever mix of resources that we end up at, we know that we're not going to spend any more than that money. In other words, if you think, well, I want to buy a different mix of resources, and that forces you to dip into that 5% set aside, then you are violating that policy that we just established. Does that?
Yeah, because it seems to me there should be a reserve set aside for an operating reserve, just for paying bills. There should be a minimum for that. There should be a minimum reserve for rate stabilization. And then paying off the debt seems like a short-term thing that's going to go away in a number of years, and we should just have a policy about that that shouldn't be addressed in the reserve policy. But I was hoping we could get maybe something a little more definitive for the next meeting, but if you really need something tonight, then I'm...
Because, so you were saying is that our payback is variable. We don't know if we're going to pay back some of it or part of it. It's not, I'm used to the finance of we're always going to be paying a certain amount. So, but you're saying on this, well, if we got 5%, we're going to put it, but not always the same amount?
No, contrary. I'm saying you're going to put 5% exactly. You're going to just keep 5% set aside, and you're going to use it to pay back what you owe. And you know what you owe, and you know how long it's going to take you to pay it back. We know we owe $2.7 million to the originating and to all of you, and we know we need to pay back in 4 years. That's part of your JPA. That is not negotiable as far as we are concerned. We know that we are seeking $20 million worth of capital, working capital fund, and to the extent that we get it, either from you or from the banks, we know that we're going to take money from those reserves to pay that back over a 5-year period. That is what we are recommending today. Then there will be some money left over from that 5% that we set aside, and that money left over is what's going to go into the rate stabilization fund.
And with respect to operating reserve or additional cash available during that first year, I'll just remind us that the $20 million that we're seeking early on is separate from this 5% of revenues that are being set aside. And so not all of that $20 million is envisioned to be expended in the first year and would also be available if needed. That's the purpose of the $20 million.
Right. Jeannie?
So I have that same concern. So, I mean, I'm more inclined to say, can we give direction on this one tonight and have it come back? You know, I think as electeds, we're used to speaking the language of our finance directors and how they, you know, show what's in, you know, general fund versus what's going into this, the various labels for different accounts, you know, funding accounts. I think if we can flesh this out a little bit more, I think the intent, I feel comfortable with what you're intending to do. I think it's a little vague right now to get it to what I would say is you know, in terms of the actual policy words, because, you know, reserves mean something to some people versus set aside versus, you know, I think the policy, we do want this commitment to try and repay within this period of time. That means we have to put money off to the side. I just think if a finance director could come up with more specific language that addresses some of these questions and all, but understanding that the direction, I think we're good with the general direction, the intent here, but I think the specifics need to come back. That would be my recommendation.
So let me maybe change, think about this. So what I think this is saying in very simple terms, they want to have, they're going to adjust the renewable energy mix to make sure they have at least 5% put away. Stop. It's that simple. What they do with it, you can look at their lines there. Yeah, but right. What I think he's just trying to say, we're going to make sure we don't buy so much renewable energy that we have less than 5%. I think that's as simple as what you're really getting at, is it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Howard?
So, wait. So if that's the case, would you consider coming up with a motion that, somebody come up with a motion that captures that piece of it, and let's see if we can work with that.
Yeah, I spent the last 5 years in my city redoing all of the reserve policies and cash flow policy. When you finish all this, you end up with 40 pages of stuff because there's all kinds of details and structure that you're going to want. But for now, I think we need to leave tonight, and if Liz is the one making the motion, I'll look at you. We just need to leave here tonight giving staff direction that we like the theme, but we're going to need to just expand it out a little bit.
Well, the terms may vary, but I mean, I think
And so
Rob said it very succinctly.
It's going to come back. But anyway, go ahead, Liz. You sound like you had something.
Who wants to make the motion?
No, I think it's been a good discussion because it is the language and how we're used to looking at things, and we want to be clear in our own mind. So the purpose of this policy and the motion before us is that we approve the concept of having a reserve set aside of 5%. At least 5%, yes. That's the motion.
I think the motion has to include the bit about them coming back with more detail and stuff like that.
I can do that too. I would recommend, then, in the past, staff has prepared these projected operating results, and it has broken it down by categories, by years, and shows the actual cash flow. And what I would like to see is a revised, I said this earlier, a revised one of these showing at the next meeting what they come up with the phasing in and who goes where, because that'll make a difference on that table. And then when they get the bids back, they can tweak it if necessary. So we need some documentation to back up how the 5% is going to be obtained. and how the 20 million doesn't get spent.
I think that that's definitely something that we can accommodate. We can put back again the financial performance and bring it back to you next month, showing the impact of all these different policies that you're looking at.
And I assume that it includes a repayment plan.
And it includes a repayment plan.
Then I would,
That's
then I would second that motion.
All right, thank you very much. More discussion? If there is none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. We'll move on to 5. Power resource preference.
Just on item number 5, I just really quickly, I think that we need to make sure that we give staff the flexibility to sort out in the power market as we get our footing, and I just want to make sure that we don't do anything to impinge upon that. But I would argue that our goal should be to maximize greenhouse gas-free sources, and to the extent that we opportunistically can add on more renewable, that's great.
Okay.
So if you need an emotion, I would move the staff recommendation with that bias to it.
Could you just wait a
Sure, no, go ahead. I'll pass it down. You do whatever you need, please.
Howard, you brought up an item, I think it was you earlier, about this doesn't include just buying RECs. And so I do think we want that direction to be given. We want this to be real power, not RECs.
I'm super big fan of that strategy.
And secondly, not that there's a lot of nuclear power available, but do we want to
Exclude or include?
Do we want to exclude nuclear power? Which I would suggest that we do want to exclude nuclear power, but I'm not sure what the will of the board would be. And maybe it's such a ridiculous notion that we would buy nuclear power, that there's any available, I don't know.
I didn't have it either in the back of my head or the front of my head or anywhere in my head to pursue buying nuclear power. Although I do warn you that the electricity that comes to this county will have
nuclear
electrons that are coming from nuclear power, because electricity travels in the path of least resistance, so no matter who you contract with.
It's an interesting and complicated debate. I would argue that we should not go out of our way to purchase nuclear power, but we all realize our customers will end up consuming nuclear power. And if you had the choice between coal and nuclear for next year, I would really rather have nuclear than coal, because I would really rather get out of the carbon footprint, and we'll get to the all renewable over time. So that was where I started, was I think our focus should be greenhouse gas free first, and let's figure out how to get as much renewable as we can. And our ultimate goal, and maybe I'm incorrect, or you guys can tell me I'm crazy, but I think our ultimate goal would be to be 100% greenhouse gas free and 100% renewable some decade. But you know, where do we start this year? Let's maximize greenhouse gas free.
So would you be willing to include no RECs in the motion?
And no RECs. I've always said no RECs, and I forgot it this time.
Right.
For the public, could you clarify what REC stands for?
Yeah, so renewable energy credits, a way to certify that power was actually from a renewable source, and there is a way for those to float through a secondary market unbundled with the power, and I would prefer we not go that route.
Director Miller, I do not understand, and probably we're going to have a discussion around the RECs and the bundled RECs versus the unbundled RECs, and whether they are real or not. I think
if they're not real, then this will be easy. If they are real, then it puts a small constraint on you, I hope.
Well, I know that they are real. I know I've acquired them in the past, and I know where they come from, and I know that some suppliers out there in the market won't be able to build renewable resources if it wasn't for the ability to sell some of those RECs to people who need them and people who can buy them.
Sonoma's taken a fair amount of lumps for some of their strategy of buying RECs, and whether it's real or fake, I don't know. But they have been getting some bad press on that exact issue, and I'd rather not be in a position of trying to justify that our power is clean but in a position to say, yes, we've done everything we could to make sure we've provided clean and renewable and carbon-free power.
Yeah, you owe me my, I owe you my technical knowledge, and to that effect.
And I owe you lunch, so we're kind of even there. I'm going to have to get together with you so you can help educate me. I'm just trying to avoid the political problem that I've seen near us, over that specific
That's
issue.
where I cannot touch. I mean, I can tell you the risks are real, and the risks are necessary sometimes in order to have some of those renewables be built. However, if it is the direction of this board to say we're not going to touch the risks, then that's will be the way I will go.
Maybe we say to the extent possible?
Well, maybe you come back and educate us next time.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of education in that space because I'm just trying to avoid bad perception.
I do think that's a separate policy question that should be discussed and researched as well.
So back to what I was trying to say, let's go greenhouse gas free, renewable preferred, and future discussion about RECs.
Is that the motion?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. More discussion.
I have a question. So, Tom, I asked a question about greenhouse gas goals, and you said you're going to, when I was talking about maximize reduction of greenhouse gases, and you said you'll be coming back next month with a proposal of what's achievable throughout the region or for the cities? Did I understand?
To the extent that we can, I would say definitely by August time frame, we should have a reasonable idea about what's out there in the market, and we should be able to come back to you and say this is the appropriate mix that we feel is right for us. But we won't just do that. We will offer alternatives that will have things that will maximize greenhouse gas reduction, and others that will zero out the risks, and show you what the price associated with each one will look like, and eventually you'll get to choose.
Okay. And I just want to, another question. So whatever we set our goal and we say we're going to be able to reduce greenhouse gas by 20%, will that flow to the consumer, and by nature of buying it from you, they are reducing their footprint by 20%? Is it that simple?
I believe so, but maybe you can speak to that.
Their footprint with respect to their electricity usage, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so whatever we set as our goal, that will flow, that will be the same as the consumer then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're down there.
Oh, I'm
Go
not
ahead.
done yet. I'm trying to understand. I mean, I think we're sitting up here trying to make some policy choices and such, and I guess I'm not, maybe it's the hour and not having a break, I don't know. But I'm not clear what exactly the policy is here that we're talking about in terms of saying we want a mix that maximizes greenhouse gas free and, with a high preference toward renewable. That's motherhood and apple pie, because I mean, and we're in this, but we still need to be at a reasonable point, because we're saying we're setting our rates at 1%. So I mean, I can go hog wild and my revenue doesn't cover my expenses, right? So I'm trying to understand what exactly is this policy decision we are making.
I get how I've shortcutted what I said. Our CEO has recommended that we not set a hard number because it undermines his negotiating position. I agree with him in that. And I think for us as a policy, we understand that we're shooting for the 1%. And within that 1% goal and the other economic constraints that we've given via the last motion, we'd like him to achieve as high a level as greenhouse gas free as possible. That would be his first goal of the power sources. The second goal would be renewable. And that was what I was trying to get at. All the other constraints that we've already given him tonight would remain on the board. And then the follow-on was that we would ask for a subsequent discussion about this REC topic. Maybe there's a way to email us all an answer, or maybe we have to discuss it here. Email would be my preferred choice, but a way to educate us. Anyway, I think the policy really is, with all the other things that we've put in play, we could be telling him to go 100% renewable.
Do it all within that 1% rate. He could go 100%.
Yeah, so we're saying get us the most greenhouse gas free you can get, and to the extent that we can optimize some renewable in that, great. But the first priority is greenhouse gas free, the second priority is renewable, and all the constraints we give them are what have to be met in that.
First priority is all the constraints, and then this is the next tier down, okay?
Actually, that's really interesting. So, supposing you came back and said, the only way I can get you 1% is to give you all pure Virginia coal. I would probably say let's fold the JPA and let's just buy PG&E. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I think that we have to meet the goals. I think we really have to find out how to get to be cleaner than PG&E, and a lot.
Mm-hmm. All right, very good. And so, Tom, does it work for you to come back to us with some written information about bundled RECs, unbundled RECs, what they are, and how they've been used in the utility industry in California?
I've just found another assignment for our.
Well,
yes.
Howard would prefer to receive it in writing, and I think it may make sense.
It will be in writing. I think we
did some study offline, and then we came back, and we could have a more informed discussion, perhaps.
Yes.
All right, very good. So we have a motion and a second.
And so, Howard, I want to go back to your coal thing. I know, I'm going to kill you. No, but the thing is what I'm hearing you say, which is probably part of the motion, is that other constraint that's on all of this is we have a commitment that we're going to be cleaner than PG&E. I mean, PG&E is kind of, you said 100% coal. Well, we got to at least meet or beat PG&E in terms of clean energy, right? Because otherwise, what's our name mean, right? So that's the other constraint on here. And that's what we get.
I was just trying not to give them a hard percentage because I think it would undermine his negotiating position. And I think the trick is to get a foothold here at the right price. And as we start going through power contracts and other long-term purchase agreements, we're giving clear indication that we would bias towards renewable to the extent possible. So our purchasing team would go out and secure long-term renewable energy for us. But hey, when we start on day one, hopefully there's no Virginia coal in there, but it may not be as renewable as we'd like.
Very good. Let's vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Very good. Thank
Sir,
you.
May we take a break since we've been sitting here for 2.5 hours, please?
5-minute break.
Thank you.
I figured might as well just get this one out of the way so we can turn our attention to getting some work done. I don't want to be coming back here every other month.
Then I was just, when you mentioned it though, I was like, oh, I wonder if it's just the regionalization of the grid, big grid with more reverse. Well, yeah, we're interconnected all the way. Our physical connection is that.
Wyoming, so in the grid, yeah, there's a couple, and it's just a matter of how we sort of have electrons, and then there's the physical.
But it wasn't the first time it was brought up. It actually was brought up in public comments last week as a suggestion, and it's on PCE's basic timeline. So I'm actually surprised that it wasn't even thought of or considered. And then what PCE is doing is fairly simple, so it's not a joke. It's on their website if you want to early vote. It doesn't require a lot of outreach or anything, I don't think, but it's easy enough to find out from PCE what they're doing, and if it sounds reasonable, you can do it. What seemed to be consternation. Hopefully, I think the motion is fine, it takes care of it, if there is any challenge with it, you're covered.
Very soon.
Okay, let's see if we can come back together here.
I thought it was clear.
I think it was clear.
There should be no question.
Yeah, no,
Right, Rob?
I don't think there's a question, but.
Well, it should. That's a given as far as I'm concerned. Okay. I think last time you said.
No. All right, we're going to reconvene, and we're going to move on to item 4. Which is appointing an executive committee of the Board of Directors. Is there any staff report?
Yes, we put together a staff report suggesting that you form an executive committee. It would be 5 members of the board, and that it should have people on it that will be able to serve for more than 1 year. In other words, if somebody's being termed out at the end of the year, maybe it won't be a very good idea for them to sit on the executive committee. Longevity or continuity I think is going to be important for us. And I also suggest that you may want to have a balance of both geographical and size into that committee. We are saying that the executive committee should serve at the pleasure of the board, of course, and that the board should assign them to take on certain tasks that will require some in-depth review of staff's work. And to that effect, there are two things that I know are coming over the next 6 months that will require a very close attention from the board. And they can use an executive committee to do so. And those two tasks, the first, of course, is staffing, finding a space for us to occupy, bring in the staff, how we're going to phase the staff over the next couple of years, who we're going to bring first, who we're going to bring later, what activities we're going to have to, that we're going to rely on contractors and consultants for the longer term. All the personnel rules and regulations, job classifications, job requirements, compensation, benefits, this whole large packet that you're all very familiar with, being sitting on the councils for your cities. We want your help to get that right, and the executive committee definitely can support in that regard. One more thing that we would hope that the executive committee will be doing is to be able to have a little time, so in case we need you for more than once a month, especially in the first 6 months. A second task that we believe is also equally important is to put together risk management policy it's energy risk management policy, not personnel risk management. That is key, and if you are on the market buying resources, then you definitely need to have that. You need to have certain authorities that will be delegated to a CEO, which in turn I will delegate to the power purchasers and the trader for the energy, and that requires a front office, middle office, and back office, and a variety of other tasks that are quite involved, and they do require a very extensive risk management policy that I'm already looking at a couple, and we should be able to bring something to the board, hopefully somewhere around September, October timeframe, once we are done with the work that we need to do on the personnel side. And actually, I'm sorry, I said the board, I mean to the executive committee. So these are two tasks that I think could get the executive committee quite busy over the next 6 months. One is personnel issues, and two is energy risk management. And beyond that, of course, I'm sure there will be other things that will come in that will require some in-depth review. And with that, I'll stop and see if Greg want to add anything. Then, yes.
So if in your report it doesn't mention the chair or the vice chair, I would think that you would want the chair there, and then I would think you'd want, if you have a chair, that means you should probably have the vice chair so that they're ready to take on the chair role, or are you thinking something different?
I wasn't thinking to either bind you or tell you who are to sit on it. I'm leaving that entirely up to you.
Okay.
So just a question of operations, right? It's not that the executive committee would do, the executive committee would do work, but nothing would ever be put into place until it actually came before the whole board.
Of course.
That's my question.
And then
Okay. Go ahead. John?
you were mentioning that personnel, isn't the city of Cupertino going to be working as our liaison for personnel, HR?
Up to a point, they're working as a liaison for us until November. After that, and they actually are doing a piece of the work that I've just suggested need to be done, which I think right now they are working on all the personnel rules and regs generally the big binder, the city manager or the hiring manager will hand the person that they hired and say, sign on a dotted line on all these different policies, and that they are putting together as we speak, and I believe they're going to be trying to get something by mid of July. Meanwhile, I'm working with Melody and one of the consultant support on putting the org chart together, who's gonna be in, how long it will take us to bring everybody in, the compensation, the benefits, and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Jeannie.
Yeah, I was going to say, before we get into this, for me personally, Rob, I appreciate your question. For me, I guess I would rather, if we're looking for a 5-member executive committee here, I guess my preference is to look at all 12 members and figure out how to get the right mix and all with the 5. And I guess I'm not necessarily, not that I'm opposed to it, but I'm not necessarily going to be an advocate for the chair and the vice chair needing to be a member of this committee. I think it's more important to have people who get the good mix that we're talking about in geography, city size, and availability to meet as needed to get the job done. So I would put those things a lot higher than saying we need to put the chair and or the vice chair on there.
Okay, other comments?
Are we doing comments or are we just doing questions? And
Questions? And
I got myself out of whack last time, so I'm trying
Yeah,
to be
no.
really pure this time.
Thank you. So I'm out of whack this time. So other questions? If not, is there any member of the public that wishes to speak? Seeing none, I'll bring it back up here for a motion and or further discussion.
I wanted to rekindle a thought I had last month, Greg, which was that the executive committee could be 6 members legally, correct?
That is correct. I mean, typically you're going to have a 5-member or odd number of members just for the purposes of recommendations to the full board. But legally, you could have a committee of the board being 6 members, since that's still not a quorum. So that's your choice to make it 5 or to make it 6.
Thank you. I'm the only member up here who's ineligible to serve, I think, so.
On what basis?
Well, as an alternate, clearly I'm not going to be on the executive committee. Maybe I should just make a suggestion, since I have clearly no pony in the race. I would actually disagree with you, Jeannie, and I think that having the chair and the vice chair would really make a lot of sense for organizational continuity. And I would hope that we would have some sort of legacy of succession, members graduating from executive committee to leadership roles in the organization. It's kind of hard to envision that at your 3rd meeting, but maybe one day. So I think really it's very essential that there's geographic diversity, and given the makeup of the chair and the vice chair, and I also think it's really worthwhile that the initial executive committee should have the members of the original core communities on it. So I would think that an executive committee that included Dan, Jim Griffith, Rob, Rod, John, and Jeannie would achieve the things that I'm thinking about in terms of geographic diversity, as well as having the representatives of Sunnyvale and Mountain View added to Cupertino in the leadership role. So that would be an actual motion. And Lisa wants me to. So the following cities would be represented: Los Altos, Mountain View, Cupertino, Los Gatos, Sunnyvale, and Gilroy.
Second.
So let me make a comment. I think that's totally the wrong approach. We should be trying to figure out what the skills are that we need in the interests of the people to fulfill the needs of this particular item, and to pick cities because they were the ones that were there in the beginning. I get the nod to those cities, but if you follow all of your logic, what you're saying is that represents all the future leaders, their succession plan, and all of that. So I think as an organization, we should figure out who the 5 or somebody brought up 6, the right people are to serve on this based on what we need to do in the next 6 months. And that may or may not include the 2 members that are currently in leadership for this group. It may or may not include Jim or any of the other founding cities. I think that's the way we should be approaching it. I don't think that we should be approaching this as, hey, you're a founding member, so you're the executive committee. Tom, you get what you get skill set wise. Not that John isn't good. I'd love to see John on the committee, by the way, because I think, for example, and I'm going to pick on John, right? John has had to look employees in the eye. He has to fire and hire people. He has to deal with all the state labor law issues and all that. He would be an extraordinary candidate to be on the executive committee, not because he's from Mountain View, but because of what John knows how to do. And those are some of the skills that we're going to need as we set up our own structure and our own set of operating rules. And I think that would be the criteria more than John being from Mountain View, and he brought his supporters. So anyway, so I disagree with the motion pretty strongly because I think we should do it in a slightly different way in terms of getting the right skill set.
Okay. Rob?
So, you know, we haven't even asked the people if they're interested. We kind of drafted them. Yeah. So let me start off by just saying that I am interested. I was assuming as vice chair was going to be it, and okay, that assumption was wrong, but I'm still interested. I do represent the small cities. I've been a manager in the tech industry, so I've done plenty of hiring and firing. I've done writing of procedures and so forth for my department, so I have a lot of that. I spoke to my town manager today about help having HR review these from my town, help me review. I'm assuming Sunnyvale's going to write them, and it'll be great, but we'll have a second town's eyes on them for me. So, you know, that's my prep so far.
Could I try, with your indulgence, could we just raise hands and see who might be interested in serving, realizing this is an additional Brown Acted meeting that we'd probably have once or twice a month? See who has time. I don't know if your idea is we would meet during the day or in the evening or what. If you could turn on your microphone.
I will meet with you anytime you are available. So to the
All
extent that there are some people on the board that will not be able to meet during the day, then we'll find some time at night to meet.
Okay, but your idea would be we might be meeting twice a month in the startup.
With that, I definitely agree, maybe even 3 times.
So I guess could we just raise hands and see who is interested in doing this? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We got 5.
6.
Well, could we move that it be the 6 people with their hands raised?
We could have a theoretical discussion for another half hour if you like.
I move the 6 people whose hands raised, in all due respect to Tony.
All right, are you willing to withdraw your motion? Okay.
What about my second?
Did we get a second? Okay, so just for the record, who are those people? We have Daniel and Liz and Howard.
Of course, Howard.
The chair and the vice chair and John. Right?
John, whatever you're doing is going to be fun, so I want
McAllister.
But, you know, to Director Griffith, I mean, he has tremendous knowledge and background and passion in this, and I would love to see him be involved in this, but I didn't see a hand go up, so your experience would be greatly appreciated and respected.
I believe Jim has respectfully declined. I would like to make one minor, because we cut to the people really fast, which is important. I'd like to make one addition. I'll look at Burton and see if this makes any sense. Just the term of this, I understand your need for continuity, but just being elected officials, there's already a natural turnover point in January. And could we sync this up to turnover with the point of the board also?
That is, by the way, the idea in the next item on operating rules and regulations. We set it up to be that the initial term will be 2 January, and then there'll be an annual meeting at which point you will appoint your officers and all your committee members.
Which would include this one.
That would include this one. So the recommendation would be that initial term would be until January, and then everyone can still be reappointed, obviously, to continue for another one-year term.
Perfect.
Okay. A burning question, Daniel?
No.
Comment? Oh, no. All right, I think we're ready for a vote here. Yes.
That was Howard.
All right. Let's vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain.
Thank you.
Brilliant suggestion, Rod, for a show of hands.
Well, at least I get one per meeting, right? So thank you.
That was Rob, not Rod.
So we're going to move to item 5, adopt a resolution approving operating rules and regulations. Staff report, please.
Yes, so before you are your initial operating rules and regulations for your consideration. The JPA agreement provides that you may adopt operating rules and regulations, and as any new agency, you would have bylaws, and bylaws would be part of the operating rules and regulations. In addition to that, you could add whatever other policies you ultimately want to have can also be included here, but our recommendation at this point in time is to keep it simple and simply establish as your initial operating rules and regulations essentially what are the bylaws of the organization, of the board. And I will just briefly outline the main items that we have addressed within the draft before you this evening. So the first item will be that it does establish the initial term for the board officers and any committees established by the board directors. And that initial term will be simply to January of 2017. In January 2017, the operating rules and regulations provides for an annual meeting. And that's the time that you would be appointing again, your board officers and committees for a one-year term. So, for example, now with the executive committee, as I just mentioned, that'll run through January. Then you have a chance to reappoint everybody if you desire for another year, or you can make changes to the committee at that point in time if you prefer. The rules also provide a procedure for the removal of board members, and in the JPA agreement, there is a provision for removal of board measures. That's a very drastic remedy. And it does say, though, that you must establish, and this is one thing that is mandatory, that you must establish the actual grounds for removal. And so the grounds for removal that we have proposed here are, number one, that a member has 3 consecutive unexcused absences. And an excusal can be approved by the board, but if they're unexcused, after 3 consecutive missing of meetings, the person would be subject to removal. And the other item would be the unauthorized release of confidential information that has been given to you to be kept confidential. So those are only 2 grounds that we have established for removal of a board member. If a board member was removed, that member agency then would have the ability to appoint a new member to replace the removed member. We are also have provided and incorporated here the executive committee that you already have established, so that is also part of the operating rules and regulations. And one thing that's critical to do, required by the Brown Act, is you need to have formally establish your time and place of meetings. And so the operating rules and regulations provides your meeting date, which is going to be the second Wednesday of each month, to be held here. So in case there is a situation where this forum here cannot be used, such as next month, we have provided the opportunity for the board by motion at a meeting to establish an alternative location that can be approved for a subsequent meeting. So the next agenda item, by the way, will actually be asking you to do that, but we're established that procedure here within the operating rules and regulations. And lastly, we have also provided for the method for amending the operating rules and regulations, and that can be done by a majority vote. If you're going to amend the JPA agreement, that's a 2/3 vote. But for the operating rules and regulations, it's made the same as adopting or changing any policy. It's simply a majority vote of the entire board. The one thing we do have, though, is that it takes a 2-step process. So the regulation, the proposed new regulation would be presented at one meeting for consideration, and then if it looks good, you can bring it back for formal adoption at the next meeting. So, and that is a process we've used with other JPAs we have worked with. So that is essentially what we are proposing this evening. And again, the idea here, and Tom and I have discussed this, that somewhere down the road next year, we can be looking at this maybe on a little broader basis as to what other type of broader policies you may want to include within this document. But right now, we really strongly recommend we keep it simply as your basic bylaws of the board of directors.
Question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Mine should be quick, so
Howard.
it may be standard practice, but when you say unexcused absences, if I send my alternate, is that an absence?
No, that's not.
So an unexcused is an empty seat.
It will be an empty seat.
Okay.
Yes.
So hence the importance of making sure the county is represented if they choose to be, I guess.
That is very important to have an alternate. There's no question about that.
Good. Howard.
Yeah, Article 3, Section 4. If I'm reading this, I know you went through the other rules. This says an officer of the board shall be subject to removal at any time for any reason by a majority vote of the entire board.
Those would be officers of the board. So that's the chair, the vice chair, secretary, or treasurer.
So they're not removed from the board, they're removed from the officer position?
Yeah, that is correct. That's simply they'd be removed from the officer position.
Okay, so I read the words, that wasn't clear to me, but I'm assuming that's clear to everybody else?
Yeah, well, the way
when I first read it, it looked like a backdoor way to, we could all gang up and get after Rod or something and kick him off the board. It says he can be removed, and it's under the article that's labeled Board of Directors.
You know what we can do is we can add a couple of additional words here. We can say an officer of the board shall be subject to removal as an officer at any time. And that makes it absolutely clear.
That would make me a lot happier.
Yes.
Thank you.
Makes me happier too, Howard. Liz?
No, I am actually very happy that you're in that seat.
Okay. Liz?
Let's see, I think I had a couple of questions. One is on analysis and discussion, paragraph 6. It talks about the 2/3 affirmative vote. We have a little bit of a complex voting system. It's the simple vote, and then if there's an issue, then we have to do shares. Does that complicate things in this decision-making?
Well, only in this respect is that, all your votes are going to be straight-up votes with each party having one vote, unless two members of the board of directors request a voting share vote. So that would apply still here.
That still applies.
But you're going to have two directors are going to have to demand that the vote goes to a voting share vote.
Okay, that's, we just wanted to clarify that. Let's see, for any reason, the appointment of the board. I'm trying to read my little footnotes here. Is there any requirement for filling vacancies?
Not within the operating rules. So the actual JPA agreement does require that a vacancy on of the board of directors must be filled within 90 days, and that's in the JPA agreement itself.
That covers that, okay. And let's see. And the location you've indicated, right now I think we're under contract through November of 2016. Does that mean that we'd have to revise these every time we change the location?
We will. And the problem is, under the Brown Act, we do actually have to specify your meeting location. So I think that would require us at this point, if in November or December there's going to be a desire to change the location of board meetings, we would come back with a change here. In the meantime, by the way, for the interim period of time, you can just designate meeting places until the regs were actually changed.
Okay. And some cities have, out of the 12 months a year, you have a meeting 1 month off, or if we're meeting every 2 weeks. We have meetings every month. Is that consistent? I'm just asking.
Yeah, what will happen is that if you want to have a dark month, you would just simply decide that you would not meet in a given month, and then there'd be no quorum, and that meeting would not take place.
Okay, thank you. And then, let's see, commencing in Section 3, commencing in 2007, the board shall hold an annual meeting. Is there any more detail? It's in January. We don't have to list the location of that now. We can establish it
At that point in time.
At that point.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Tony.
I had a question, Greg. It provides for what happens if the board member is removed for cause. But what happens to that seat? So let's say John is absent 3 meetings in a row when we vote to remove him. Does that mean Mountain View has to appoint someone new, or does it mean Mountain View doesn't have a representative, or what's?
No, when notice is given of a potential removal, not only the member is notified, but also the agency is notified. And so if there is a removal that is ordered by this board, then the member can immediately pick another person to take the place and be there at the next meeting.
Okay, and the one comment I had was that under the executive committee, under Article 4, it should specify 6 board members.
That's a very good catch, because we were based that on the recommendation from the last item, but I will say 6 now.
And just to clarify, should we explicitly put what you said in twice, Gary, that the jurisdiction would be able to nominate a replacement thereafter?
That is in the board. That's in the joint powers agreement. The joint powers agreement says that the removal of a board member does not deprive the agency from.
So it's covered in.
It's already covered
Thank
in
you.
the JPA agreement.
All right, John.
Just a brief question. We each have an alternate.
Yes.
When you talk about an unexcused absence, that would be an absence by the alternate as well as the member.
That would be. Yeah, that is correct.
So would both of them be removed?
Well, it's interesting. We really were looking at this from the point of view of the actual director who would be subject to removal, with the idea being that really the obligation of that director, if the director
Can be
is not
punished
gonna be
for lack of
excused,
interest.
the director really should be making sure the alternate gets there. So the one that gets penalized is the director for failing to provide for the alternate to be present at the meeting. Because of the danger, what could happen if someone really became derelict in duties here and they simply weren't showing up and weren't contacting their alternate. The alternate may not even know that they should have been present at the meeting. So it seems to me could be punitive to say that both are going to be removed. Again, placing the real responsibility on attendance on the director himself or herself.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing that I don't know, whether there's a different way to look at this, but in Article 3, Section 2, appointment of secretary and treasurer, while this may be following a standard JPA sort of template, I have a little bit of a problem with this because the secretary is basically the equivalent for us as a city clerk type of person, and the person we have here in that position, as well as the person in the treasurer position, I think the way we actually technically have this, they're not reporting to the board. They're not taking direction from the board. They're reporting to the CEO. And so I'm just trying to figure out, why do we have this in here? And this says that come January, we decide whether or not the person sitting in the secretary seat serving as the kind of the clerk to the board stays or doesn't stay. If it's filled by an actual employee, I just don't know why we have this in here. And the answer you gave me was because that's kind of a standard template. But when I look at, like the Silicon Valley Regional Interoperability Authority, they don't have the treasurer. The treasurer is an employee. It's, so I guess I'm not comfortable, I guess, with the way it is. I don't know what the alternative is. But if it's not an employee, some cities do appoint their clerks. Some people elect their clerks, and some of us says that's what our city manager's job is to figure out who the clerk is. So I don't know, I see these two as being odd ducks, and in January to sit here and say, oh yeah, we're going to continue on with our treasurer and we're going to continue on with our secretary seems a little silly.
Yeah, let me explain this some more, and I think we may want to, this is one that we may want to relook at down the road a bit. And I think that right now the JPA agreement provides for both those positions to be appointed by the board, but they do not need to be board members. And so, for example, right now the treasurer is the finance director from Sunnyvale. And
Mountain View?
From Sunnyvale.
Sunnyvale, okay.
So, because again, it's clear within the JP agreement, those are two positions that do not need to be board members. And so, Tom and I were talking about this week, that probably as we go forward ultimately, that these two positions would be filled by employees of the JPA. And so the idea being here that while they would be employees of the JPA under Tom's supervision as the executive officer, there still would be a formal appointment made by the board. Now, and that would be consistent with the JPA agreement. The JPA agreement could be revised to change that and to make those two positions actually just directly appointed by the executive officer. But we would have to amend the JPA agreement to do that. So I think that in the meantime, right now, we can still get to that point under this JPA agreement. And it won't be that hard to amend this JPA agreement. You know, many JPA agreements require that the amendment has to go through the full governing body, and that's a very cumbersome process. But this agreement can be amended by simply the board of directors. It does require a 2/3 vote. So, so my thinking right now would be, and my recommendation would be, to keep it as this is, but we may want to revisit how that appointment gets made maybe later this year, first of next year.
Well, yeah, I would say if, you know, I'm okay with doing it as it is, as long as we look at this, you know, and it doesn't even have to be in the next 6 months. It can be a year from now. It can be, you know, accumulating some things. But I just think we need to, and until we staff and then we have our, you know, staffing and our jobs and all like that, we can deal with it later.
Right.
But I would just hope that we, I think we should be addressing this, because I think it's the difference between being an employee and being appointed by a board.
Yes.
It's a weird situation. So I
agree.
I don't think there's any urgency to dealing with it tonight or changing this. I agree with your recommendation.
Yeah, but I think it's a really good idea, as once you have a staffing plan in place and your own staff, that would be the time to reconsider how to approach these two positions.
Okay, good. Is there any member of the public that wants to speak on this item? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve?
Second.
And that'd be with the amendment of 6 members on the executive committee.
And section Article 3.4.
Yes, and I should say that also the other second edit. That's correct.
Is that okay?
Explain what that is again, I'm sorry.
Oh, that was that we can vote to remove an officer, but we're not removing them from the board.
Yes.
Right, that's correct.
Thank you. Very good. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. We will move to item 6, approving an alternate location for the July Board of Directors meeting in Cupertino. Where is that? Cupertino Community Hall.
Move to have our July meeting at the Cupertino Community Hall.
Second?
So Cupertino Community Hall is where the city council meets between the library and the
It's a lovely building.
city hall. Yeah, it's a lovely. This is our board of directors meeting for July, apparently because this facility is unavailable.
So
Would it be
The
at
dais does have room for 12 people.
So we'll squish up there, but it'll work.
Comment, Jeannie?
No, that's,
Okay.
I've been there. I don't see how.
Comment, Daniel?
Is it at the same time, 7 p.m., or will we change the time to 6 p.m.?
7 p.m.? Right, we'll notice the meeting for the same time.
it's just a location change.
Just the location change, Cupertino Community Hall between the library and City Hall on 10300 Torrey Avenue, or thereabouts.
And
This is July 13th, right?
That's correct.
And you said you can fit all 12 of us, or is it going to be packed?
I think we can get all 12 people on the dais.
We will fit. We will be friendly, John.
Well, I know we do that, but I was just, you know, and there's no other facilities that are a little more, because it is compact in there. And I was just concerned about it.
It is, Cupertino staff evaluated and identified that they could fit 12. It's the only other facility we've identified so far that accommodates 12 and is prepared to handle the video of the meeting the way we intend
Video,
to do.
okay.
Mhm.
That's
I
important.
promised to shower before.
It's not that close. Yeah, we were there for the PAB. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Anybody else want to talk on this, public or otherwise? If not, we will vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Unanimous. We'll go on to board member announcements. I guess I could make a comment. Melody and I were on a panel at the Stanford Energy Summit last Friday, and it was very well attended. Tom was there as well, and we had a chance to introduce him. Before our panel were the heads of California Energy Commission and CARB, the Air Resources Board, and after our panel there was an Oxford-style debate between Vernon Richter, a Nobel Prize laureate, and another one, former Energy Secretary Stephen Chu, and then two opponents debating whether or not we should have a nuclear renaissance to handle that small 20% that we're going to need as a sustainable source when the sun goes down. So it was, we got a lot of very positive comments, and I believe there will be video up on the Precourt Forum's website soon with our comments and the questions that we were thrown. So I want you to know about that. Any other comments? Yeah.
Just a minor announcement. After 23 and a half years, today's my last day at Apple. And the total patents issued came in at 19, Rob.
That really bothers me a lot. I'm going to have to work extra hard. Liz?
I was just going to say that staff is coming for a presentation next Wednesday at the monthly Chamber of Commerce in Campbell luncheon. And I look forward to having them come.
Rob?
I'll just quickly say I attended the Silicon Valley Energy Summit also, and Melody and Rod did a great job in their session.
Appreciate that.
Melody, something's happening in Mountain View on the 16th?
Things are always happening in Mountain View.
Thank you.
We have a series of 3 business workshops coming up in different locations in the county. So we've got one next week in Mountain View, the following week in Sunnyvale, and the week after that down in Gilroy.
And if you didn't get enough,
Morgan Hill, my
show up
apologies,
on
Morgan Hill.
the 16th, and I'll say a few words. Very few words.
Excellent. Anybody else? If not, we stand adjourned to the 13th of July in Cupertino. Thank you.
What is it, 11 or 10? I can't tell. 10:10. 10:10.
Congratulations.
God, we got a lot.
So will there be any more printers? There's a weird little awkwardness, right? You know, the reason